I did see that. I actually went back to rewind it because I wasn't paying full attention.
Oh, no. When did this happen?
It was during the deeper dive. He just like took a sip and just like missed his mouth entirely. And, yeah. He didn't acknowledge it at first. Then when Laffy did call him out, then he had some laughs for it. All right. What is up, guys? It is time for an NBA deeper dive where even though there is only one game today, it is such a big game in the DFS world and the prop bet market that we're going to be here to cover it as best we can. And I am Chris Spags, joined once again by one of the top players in DFS, a man who we can all aspire to be when we're putting our lineups in. He's Rynpak. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing well. Excited to talk about this amazing offensive juggernaut matchup between the Bucks and Nets. And in terms of DFS purposes, we're coming off a showdown single game slate where everybody and their mom came first last night. So excited to talk about how maybe we can potentially find ways to not tie and trying to deviate and come down potentially a solo winner, which are very, very hard to do in showdown and single game contests.
Yeah, Ryan, certainly a man who's had some expertise in the world. So we're going to talk a lot about strategy. And I think maybe dig into a little bit yesterday's slate as well that Ryan just hinted at up top on this one. But help us out right now if you can. We are all here in the name of NBA DFS and betting on this Saturday. So hit that like button, show us some love. We're all trying to help each other make some money today. Have a good time here talking about this big game, one that should be very high scoring one if it's anything like the ones in the regular season. So help us out. Hit that like button now. And of course, subscribe to the channel to check out all the content we have all day long. And also, this show would not be possible today if it were not courtesy of our sponsor, Prize Picks, is offering the simplest fantasy game in the market. If days like yesterday tilt you, I know for me, I had some struggles of my own trying to not be chalky, only see the chalkiest lineup possible, end up winning it all. On Prize Picks, you don't have to worry about things like that. You could say goodbye to your optimizers, your sharks, all of the mass multi-entry. All you have to do is pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players on the board to go over or under their projected score. And if you correctly select a 5-player lineup, you can net yourself up to 10x your entry fee from the NFL and NBA to esports and MLB. Prize Picks has it. You can combine your picks across all sports available, so get a little bit of a taste of a cross-sport parlay on there. Download the mobile app in the App Store or on Google Play today and make your first deposit to get an instant deposit match of up to $100 when you use the promo code Awesemo. That's a $100 deposit match with that promo code Awesemo to simplify daily fantasy with Prize Picks today. And one other plug to get out of the way here, if you are curious about the data we have, we're going to talk about it a lot over the course of this hour and of course every single day here on the YouTube channel. But go use the promo code NBA Deeper Dive at awesemo.com/join. You got yourself a chance to get 15% off your first week of Awesemo Plus if you're a new member, and that deal is going to be active only during the show. So go check it out right now. Use that promo code NBA Deeper Dive at awesemo.com/join. Ryan, let's talk about that slate yesterday, because I do think there is some things maybe to take away from that one that we did see so many people chopping it up. We had tweets. I think one guy tweeted us saying that it was a big win for him. I think his first positive ROI in the and one, getting an $11 return on whatever the chop was in that tournament. And it is something, Ryan, where people gravitated towards Boban yesterday, and we know the recency bias in NBA DFS and DFS in general can be pretty strong. So I'm kind of curious to see if you think it's something that A, people will sort of see that result and A, maybe try to get different, or B, follow it a little bit more and play some value guys who really don't have the ceiling you needed a captain today on DraftKings. But tell me how you're viewing that result yesterday, and I guess if there is any lasting impact heading into today.
Yeah, so I'm actually surprised it took so long to have such a massive lineup duplication on NBA Showdown. Out of any sport, I think NBA Showdown that DraftKings and FanDuel offer, NBA, I think, gets to dupe the most up top out of any sport, in my opinion. So it was about time, about a 400 plus dupe that ended up happening over there on top of DraftKings. Now, why did that lineup come in first? Obviously, everything worked out for that lineup. If you looked inside of like the game script of it, we knew it was a winner go home for the Clippers. There were 3 or 4 Clippers in that lineup. It went, I think, Kawhi, Paul George, Reggie Jackson, Batum with Boban and Luka, the other 2 options. And the reasons why that lineup worked out was it obviously was a very good lineup going into play, and rarely do good lineups do come up on first. And that's what ends up happening. A lot of times these showdown winning lineups, when they're 1 or 2 or 3 ties, it's like a really off the radar bad lineup. And what I've been a victim of, sometimes I chase way too many bad lineups and I haven't been able to draw the line of doing so far in the playoff season. It's kind of burned me. Well, today I was part of the dupes yesterday, and today I'm like, okay, it's a game 1. Lots and lots of studs. There are a lot of ways to jam in these studs with some low price guys that are kind of off the radar. We'll talk about them, but I think it's just another day in DFS. It just happened to be just a massive duplication of lineups. And I think everyone just moves on to the next day.
Yeah, that's somewhere I'm with you. And I guess, we talked about a little bit on some of the shows I've been doing over the last week, but Rayen knows one of the first guys to congratulate me last week, which I'm very appreciative of. But, trying to play some of the 150 maxes recently for myself, trying to be like guys like Rayen and Awesemo, the rest of our senior management team who's been so great at these over the years. And I have to say yesterday, like I had my feelings going into that one that would be a little bit dodgy. And I think I had some of the better non-chalky, overly duplicated lineups that were behind the one that was a 500 weight chop or whatever it was. I do think there's something to that too, where, I'm not going to max it out today, Rayen. And I don't know if you have any feelings about this, because I know some of the sharper players, like people in chat talking about this, which I observed on lineup study today. Patnaik's rolling out the exact same lineup 150 times in the big tournament, and then I think 500 times in total across all of his other lineups. Like that's something that I don't think you see that often. I do tend to think that the approach of just, hey, chopping out X amount of, lineups are going to be highly projected, highly duplicated is still going to be the best move. But I just think it's something that I'm curious your thoughts on, just that slate in particular being an aberration in a way that maybe we don't get quite as often showdowns, because you've had a ton of success in these over the last few years.
So I'm completely fine with what Patnaik did, and I'm not the one to call him out for putting a 150 lineup train. He can do whatever he wants, and he's earned that. I've also done trains like that in the past, where I think if you look back on the Boban slate the night before, I didn't run a full 150. I think I ran 75 different lineups, and I ran them two times. And sometimes I just can't find 150 good lineups to play. And that's why I think, I don't know if Patnaik was running out of time, or he just chose to run one, which I think a lot of people could have just ran that Boban lineup with that one. And obviously it pays off. Trains are completely fine, in my opinion, in showdown at times, but you have to pick and choose your spots. It's not always, obviously, the competitors are going to be like, okay, I only have to beat 10 of this type of lineup. And especially people who play tournaments, they see that lineup dupe that happened yesterday, the duplication. They're like very happy seeing that. Wow, I just have to beat that lineup by just one, or not even one, by 0.25, and I've crossed it. And that's all what those lineups just fell right behind were feeling like. So, yeah, I think you can pick and choose your spots, especially in NBA, a DFS showdown single game. It gets really tricky on running 150 lineups, good 150 lineups, and that's where you got to start chasing some bad lineups. And that's where what I'm trying to figure out is, where do I draw that line? Similar to what Patnaik did, ran that 150 lineup train. You'll see people run like 50. They'll run 50 lineups and just have it entered 3 different times. People do that on these NBA showdown sites. Not as much of so. I think over 2 years ago, you would see a lot more trains, but recently it's come down where the showdown edge has diminished quite a bit, and people are slowly starting to figure out how they can be unique and still have a huge upside of winning that contest solo.
Dope then asking a good question in chat too, which I think we could touch on here to kind of close out the strategy parts of this. Obviously, we're talking a lot about the strategy throughout the course of the show here, but just wanted to kind of talk about higher level through the lessons, hopefully that some of us learned yesterday. But Dope then asking, doesn't using the same lineup 150 times in the same contest go against the reason to max enter? I certainly don't want to speak for Patnaik's motivations or anything, but knowing that he is a top player, has been a top player for a while, it wouldn't surprise me if he just thought, hey, the lineup here that's got the best shot of winning is going to be duped anyway, so might as well just try to make sure this one's going to cash. Like, it seemed like a lineup that would be pretty difficult not to cash. So I think that could have just been the approach, that's the best way to be plus EV on the night. But I do think generally that's something Awesemo talks about a lot, is, maxing out the tournaments that you can afford to enter, whether it be the 150 max, whether it be the quarter arcade, the dime, any of those, just trying to get a different look across your 20 lineups or your 150 lineups and get, a chance for each of them to bubble up, and hopefully get a little bit of distance between each one so that different combinations can catch the positive variance of it all. But Rayen, just to answer this question, I guess for you, how do you feel about the idea of the 150 lineups being the same one? I just feel like, talk about it for me for a general strategy, because I think people may be confused by that and seeing a top player deploy that for this particular slate.
So I think maybe I don't know what his motives were. There could have been a lot of different implications on why he did that, right? So I think he maybe would have been like, all right, I'm just going to chalk this up. Maybe this lineup doesn't necessarily win, but somehow falls in that top 10 where he maybe is 3x, 4xing, 5xing his entry fees. And that's a really solid night in any given night, right? For any tournament player. So that could be his motive. And I think maybe he just was like, all right, the field is pretty sharp with the projected ownership he had put together. And he's going to be like, all right, I'm just going to take my chances with this lineup and hope for the best. And I think maybe that's probably where it fell. But it's tough to pick and choose these people's motives. There are a lot of very good showdown players out there that you'll consistently see that somehow find a way on their own island. I think Dr. Carl is one of those guys who does that. The Colts is very, very good. Our own Steve Buzzard. Earlier in the playoffs, he found a way to win both the FanDuel single game slates on that day solo, which is really hard to do. And he managed to do that. And I think other guys, I think Ninja Sniper on DraftKings, these are some players that I've kept an eye on how they're building these lineups, building that upside. And our own Slack chat member, P. Hanley, I think in Slack, he's BS Great, I believe. And he's just been on an absolute tear for the last 6 weeks, just scorching hot heading into the playoffs in terms of just all sorts of DFS.
Yeah, and so a lot of those guys are using that Awesemo data, so feel free to use that promo code NBA Deeper Dive if you want to save 15% on your first week of Awesemo Plus at awesemo.com/join. Again, this promo code only going on during the show, so use it. There'll be different ones for the shows that are on the air at different times, but just use this one while you have it now, and don't ask us for a promo code later because it's there for you right now, 15% off with that promo code NBA Deeper Dive at awesemo.com/join. We got an ownership projection update as well, which the Live Before Lock crew will talk more about that stuff. No money time on the Deeper Dive. Too serious of a show to go to money time here. But we will talk about ownership throughout the course of this show. And Ryan, it does seem like a slate where we can talk about the player who is going to be, I think, logically in the vast majority of lineups for good reason. Giannis was a monster throughout the season when he played Brooklyn as well. A team that can't defend very, very well. Giannis basically, people have talked about it a lot across the NBA analysis community as well as on this channel. I know Josh mentioned it, that Giannis is functionally basically the center here for Milwaukee. We know Brooklyn historically not good against centers, so Giannis going to get whatever he wants. And Ryan, today, I will say I have no issue having him in every single lineup. The one thing that I would do, though, is cut him down on him at captain because everybody's going to be there. And that is something, if anybody out there watch the late slate shows, and Ryan, I'm sure you could talk more about this, that you could cut that ownership on the chalk captain and get, X amount of different looking lineups. Even if you want to play some Giannis at captain, I just think that's the move to do today. But give me your thoughts on Giannis here, how you're approaching him. And I guess, are there any lineups at all in which you wouldn't have Giannis?
So yeah, Giannis in this matchup in the regular season, granted, there was all three of the Brooklyn Nets did not play together. Giannis was an absolute monster. He went 63.9, 75.6, 54.5 FanDuel points respectively in those three games. I will not be shocked if Giannis averages 45 and 15 in this series. The way the Nets kind of did is played him was like, Giannis is going to do his thing. We just don't want Drew and Chris Middleton to really beat us. The other guys like DiVincenzo, who was playing these games. And now it's going to be the likes of Bryn Forbes and Pat Connaughton. Yeah, it's a one-game slate. You expect Giannis to be in FanDuel, one of the top 5 scorers. He's $500 cheaper than Harden over there. Coming in on DraftKings, one thing that's really unique about ownership projections and why you should use that Deeper Dive promo code is we not only give captain projected ownership, but also the utility of projected ownership. And then for FanDuel, it goes MVP, Star, and Pro. And that's really a nice way to kind of see where kind of the projected ownership is looking, and you can make your informed decision points based off of that. But looking at the captain price tag of Giannis 17.7, where you're saving $300 off of Harden. Yeah, even at captain, you can definitely be with the field or ahead above the field because Giannis definitely has the upside of being the highest scoring player by, 20, 25 plus points in this type of matchup. So yeah, I really like Giannis today. And I think the rest of the field does too. And now where you can potentially, if you think that want to fade Giannis, if you're okay taking that sort of risk on this one game slate, you kind of got to make sure your lineup has either Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton or both of them, just because like if you don't think Giannis gets there for some reason, either being foul trouble, an injury, or some sort of double tech ejection, these things you got to look into in these one game slates, because then it's probably Drew Holiday and Middleton doing most of the offensive damage for the Bucks. So it's tougher to fade Giannis on a one game slate. It depends on how many lineups you're building. Even if I were building one, I'm going to definitely have Giannis tonight.
Yeah, Giannis looks like a very strong play, though. One of those plays, too, according to the Awesemo props tool, which you can always check out on the site as well. One of the better things, you can check out some of these numbers on OddsShopper as well. But there is a tool directly on the top tab under NBA for Awesemo as well for the new NBA player props tool. And Giannis is under today, 33.5 points, has a 62% chance of winning, according to Awesemo. So something to keep in mind for Giannis that maybe, or if you want to fade Giannis somewhere, maybe taking that under bet might be one place to do it. Or if you're just heavy on Giannis, rather, taking taking that under bet might be one way to get a little bit different, or just to try to hedge your chance here with Giannis. But I'm with you, Ryan. I just think Giannis, one of those plays here, the rebounding, the assists, the scoring should definitely be there in the easiest way possible. And then the Nets too also have done some weird things, allowing Giannis to shoot unlimited threes in the matchups during the year. I don't have to do that again, but that was something that led to some upside for him. And I think could be something here that if he does actually get hot from three, or hot relative to Giannis standards, easy way for him to get more points too. And I guess that's a question for you too about the captain ownership, Ryan, because normally I do think the strategy is just to maybe not even play the chalk captain at captain, just to try to get different, put him in utility. But because Giannis' ceiling is so high, and even the floor really, like, I think you could say it's probably a good 10 points higher than a Kevin Durant, at least in that range. Is he a guy that maybe you kind of are willing to overlook the ownership? I think you're sort of implying that with what you said earlier, but is he somebody where maybe the ownership isn't quite as much of a factor as it might be normally on a showdown or single game?
Yeah, I think so. Just because of that upside being so immense. See, especially on, we got to look at the format of these two sites, right? DraftKings, where you get the 1.5 multiplier in scoring and 1.5 multiplier in price. So Giannis is not the most expensive player on the slate on both sites. So while on FanDuel, you don't get that salary multiplier, the salary stays the same, where you just get the 2x. So let's say if Giannis outscores the next highest scoring player by 20 points, those extra 40 points, it is so hard to make up on FanDuel elsewhere. Over there on DraftKings, it is really hard to make that up, especially when these studs go off. And you'll see sometimes maybe a sneaky low priced price captain gets in there, so you can jam in another stud in these showdown contests on DraftKings. But very rarely, when someone like Giannis' caliber outscores the next guy by 30 points, it's you're going to see him in the captain more times than not.
Yeah, I'm with you on it. So that's why, to me, I will try to be with the field on him. I don't want to get too crazy with Giannis, but for me, even somebody where my whole strategy for showdowns, and one that I think, hopefully, if you guys are following the late slate show during the year, like, did actually work fairly well, and was happy to see people actually doing well with it. But I think in this spot, Giannis is one where I would just be afraid to get no Giannis in a way that normally is not the case on showdowns. Mm-hmm. We got one super chat here from Charles asking best DK captain for a single entry / small field, and we're going to talk about this as we go through, obviously, all the players here, because we're going to have time to do that on the deeper dive today. But we do have, I think, a reasonable question here, Ryan, where to me, it would just be for a small field. We talked about Giannis enough here where I think the win would probably blow me towards Giannis more. But I think if you wanted to get different right away, going to Kevin Durant as the number 2 guy in terms of my median projection. And I guess Harden could be another number 2 guy you can go to instead. But to me, it's one of those 3 because it's small field. For bigger field stuff, I think is where you're probably trying to chop it up a little bit more. Yeah,
I guess small field, I think you take the raw points and like the upside of Giannis and find your ways to get different in the utility spot. And it's just that the opportunity cost in a small field is just riding out Giannis makes a lot of sense. And going back to Giannis, seeing what how the Nets kind of guarded him, they were kind of sagging off of Giannis, daring him to shoot in the game. So like I was seeing Blake Griffin was like sagging off 5 to 6 feet off of Giannis and daring Giannis to shoot. And they're kind of, I think, going to try to do that in the series yet again. We'll see how effective that is throughout the series, but Giannis is going to get his against this Brooklyn Nets defense. So I really like Giannis, especially in small field. I think it's getting a little too cute elsewhere. I think other guys that open things up and have that upside is maybe Jrue Holiday on the Bucks side of things as well. I think he's a viable small field captain option as well.
Let's talk about some of these other Bucks. And again, guys, help us out and hit that like button if you can. Really do it for anything you're watching on YouTube, obviously, especially on the Awesemo YouTube channel. But it always helps out the content creators out there. And as a company that's doing a lot of content out there, we definitely want to support the community. So help us out, hit that like button. But just in general, good YouTube etiquette out there if you can help out the channels and help them get seen by some more people as best you can. Just cram that like button down and subscribe as well so you can see all the content that we have going all day long across every single sport. Chris Middleton, Jrue Holiday, 2 guys, Ryan, that jump out to me where maybe a bigger boost from not having Donte DiVincenzo on the court than you would expect. And I think too, definitely relative to Giannis, where Giannis's rates basically exactly flat with where they would be in court time with Donte DiVincenzo. These guys do just kind of carve up his role. I know people may be a little more excited, or last time especially, very excited to go to Pat Connaughton playing that 5th starter role, but Connaughton did absolutely nothing because it does seem like a lot of the possessions do go more Chris Middleton and Jrue Holiday's way. And both guys to me, Ryan, I think are plays that are fairly interesting and to me going to be above the field on them and at both captain spots, it looks like, and utility spots. And I think they are strong plays. For me, Middleton especially, I think jumps out relative to the DK slate. But tell me how you're feeling about these guys. You have a lean between the 2 of them. Are you playing them both together? I guess what's your approach with both Middleton and Holiday at price tags are going to make it tough to get both of them in with Giannis and also get one of the net studs?
Yeah, Middleton and Jrue Holiday are very solid options. Middleton, especially on DraftKings, where you get that 3-point bonus over there. Very strong consideration to go to. The utility price of 9,000, the captain price coming in, I believe it was 13.5. So that's a strong option to consider. And look, if Giannis has an off day, I expect Middleton and Jrue Holiday to carry the load for them. Jrue Holiday was okay the first 2 games out, and then was absolutely sensational against that Brooklyn team the last time he played them. So Jrue Holiday has a huge upside. They're going to need Jrue Holiday for his defense, obviously against guys like Kyrie, James Harden, and KD. And he has shown that upside offensively all year long. And this Bucks team is going to miss DiVincenzo's versatility. I think it's a pretty significant loss. I think the way DiVincenzo would fit in on that starting 5 made that Bucks team so strong. Obviously, Bryn Forbes was shooting like Klay Thompson in that in the last couple games against the Heat. But I think they're really going to miss DiVincenzo's versatility, not on the offensive end, but on the defensive end, when he was just like, he could competently switch onto other guys and just hold his own, hold his ground. And where I don't think the guys like Bryn Forbes and Pat Connaughton can do that as effectively. So it's going to be interesting to see how they target Connaughton and Forbes in this on this Bucks team. But the guy who in this series, I think, kind of just jumping the gun outside of Middleton and Jrue Holiday, whose minutes I think is going to get cut back a little bit, is going to be Brook Lopez. Someone obviously who played for the Nets. I think we're going to see a lot more Giannis at the 5 in this series than I think the public is expecting. Brook Lopez played 24, 25, and then there was one game that he played 34 minutes against his Nets team in the regular season. But I think his minutes ceiling is just around 24 and 25. He played well in that Heat series, and I think there's going to be a lot of times where Brook Lopez is going to be put on an island when Harden and Kyrie and KD are just going to go past him. And Budenholzer is going to have to pull him out of the game and going to shift Giannis to the 5 and bring in guys like Tucker to play some minutes, maybe Bobby Portis. But I think Tucker is going to be the next guy up, someone who played minutes for the Bucks against this Nets team in those 2 main matchups.
So speaking of that, we got a couple super chats here that we will get to, guys. So if you don't get them answered right away, have no fear. We're just trying to talk through the points that are relevant to everybody as best we can right away. But people ask about DeAndre Jordan. He did start 3 of the games against Milwaukee this year. I think that might have been all the games he was active for. So it does seem like they've gone to him for rim protection. He has not played in a month, though. So that is certainly a bad sign for a guy normally getting an unexpected boost in minutes, but has been used in that capacity, Ryan. So I guess, is that factoring in at all with how you're considering Brooklyn? And I guess, too, I don't know. I guess there might not necessarily be a trickle down with DeAndre Jordan resulting in more Lopez minutes because of the way that they're going to, approach that. But it does seem like DeAndre Jordan maybe could be one of those players that's just completely going overlooked right now. So talk to me about that, because I do think that does have some implications for what Milwaukee does as well.
So playoffs, and Giannis has absolutely tore Blake Griffin apart in the playoffs when Blake Griffin was more healthier than he is now, potentially. But obviously, credit to Blake Griffin. He has diminished his role on this team to a whole nother screen pass player, screen pass first player on this Brooklyn Nets team. Giannis is just like eating Blake Griffin alive when they've gone head to head. And there was matchups where we saw DeAndre Jordan play against Giannis, guard Giannis in this matchup. So I do think DeAndre Jordan plays in this series. It's going to depend on what happens. If Giannis erupts for 30 points and 15 rebounds in the first 2 quarters, we might see Steve Nash off to go to DeAndre Jordan. My concern is he hasn't played in a month, but I do think we see him at the series. I'm not sure if we see him in world for you. And like, he can just open everything up for you over there at that min salary price. So if you're making a lot of lineups and you fall on DeAndre Jordan, yeah, I think that's completely fine. He's 1K. He can get you 10 points, and that could be it. That's all you might need to do on a showdown slate. We've seen these 1K guys be in the winning lineup with 5-6 points sometimes. So, and if DeAndre Jordan gets on the court due to either Claxton foul trouble or Blake Griffin foul trouble, I think DeAndre Jordan's slow down Giannis. No one's going to stop Giannis, but I think he can slow him down potentially better than Blake Griffin. So DeAndre Jordan makes for a very exciting tournament play on a 1-game slate. And very rarely do I say it's okay to play someone who hasn't played in a month, but I think it's okay to fall on some lineups. Don't be overexposed to DeAndre Jordan, in my opinion, but I think there's a chance he might play. I don't know if he plays in game 1, but he just opens up the world. And in terms of the puzzle we're trying to solve today, it's really helpful to have a guy like DeAndre Jordan potentially play 8 to 10 minutes and find a way to 6 to 7 fantasy points, because that might be all you need.
Yeah, on a slate where people will be playing Landry Shamet, Tyler Johnson, pretty good amounts. PJ Tucker as well, projected for around 25% ownership. Certainly not the worst thing in the world to take a flyer on DeAndre Jordan. I think I'd feel a little better if we had any minutes projected at all from our Awesemo data team going his way, but there is some variability there to that. And I do think, there's a way here for DeAndre Jordan to get minutes, but Ryan, I think your take's pretty sound where it might not be game one. It might just be one where they get the results they're happy enough with, but then maybe they see some things between game one and game two. Maybe they see things by the end of game one. It's sort of hard to prognosticate that. So that's why he's a very risky play. The one, unless, somehow he ends up starting, I think would be the one variable that we don't know yet. But I would say that's sort of how to view it, is that it's a play that can pay off, but not one that's the highest probability. Let's talk more. Actually, let's take the super chats real fast. Darren Unger asking FanDuel last spot, Claxton or Griffin. I think for me today, that would be, let me just double check here. I think that's still really Griffin for me. I think the price tag may be a little more appealing, but Blake, I feel like the minutes maybe more secure, Ryan. But how are you feeling about that one for FanDuel, Claxton or Griffin?
So Blake Griffin in the May 4th matchup played 28 minutes. I believe he found his way almost near the closing lineup. I could be wrong. I need to pull up that rotation real quick, but from what I'm just going off the top of my memory, but Blake Griffin, and that was the first time I was like, oh, wow. So Blake Griffin's minutes limit are kind of gone because he was never playing upper 20s minutes. And that was that game. He played 28 minutes, and it was the first time he'd played that type of minutes in some time. And going to Griffin or Claxton. Claxton played really well against this Bucks team the first time around, I believe, before Harden got there. So Claxton's price tag, there's a price tag difference. Claxton comes in at 8K on FanDuel, while Blake comes in at, pulling this up, pardon me, Blake comes in at also 8K. So there's the same price tag over there on FanDuel. And I do think Blake Griffin's going to be much more popular than Claxton. So if you're building tournament lineups, I think I'd take some chances on Claxton. But in raw points, I still think I got to think Blake Griffin outscores Claxton today. But I just think Claxton has a higher range, intriguing type of play, because maybe he comes on there and has a great stint against Giannis and kind of slows him down. So, and we know Claxton has shown an upside in terms of fantasy upside throughout the regular season at times. And there's a chance he can play 12, 13 minutes, 18, 19 minutes potentially. He's already been playing 12, 8, 16, 18 minutes in the previous years. I do think those minutes stay around that range. And he can perform at quite a bit of levels. But on DraftKings, where you're taking the savings, I think I'll take my chances on Claxton. But on FanDuel, I'll take Griffin.
We got one more super chat here from Curse of the Blitz, one of our regular contributors here on the channel. I'm actually dropping a link in the chat. It's going to help you guys out. But we do have the NBA prop betting tool. She's asking about the top prop bets on the board today. And I know she's one of our people who's had some success recently betting things we talked about on the show. But that tool that I just dropped into the YouTube chat is one that you can see. And I believe it's for free for everybody on the site, because I checked in an incognito browser and it does seem to be free. But it should be premium, honestly, because it is one of the better tools that we have in terms of just pure ROI percentage and all that. You could see on the tool the points unders, the points overs, the ones that are looking the best according to Awesemo's projections with the expected win percentage. And today, James Harden's points under is going to be the best one on the board according to Awesemo. 32% expected ROI on that one. Blake Griffin's points under also looks pretty good on this one from the prop tool. 71% chance of winning, 32% expected ROI. And Drew Holiday's points under 20.5. That one has a 65% chance of winning at an ROI of 21%. So those are a lot of unders. It's actually kind of surprising, Ryan, to see the unders being what's really coming through in terms of the prop bet scoring to Awesemo. But I guess how are you feeling about an under here? Because it does feel like it's hard to really buy into an under with these two teams playing, but I guess maybe it's possible for the team to be there as an over, but these individual players to be a little more likely to hit the under.
Yeah, I do think obviously it's so the concentrated offense on Milwaukee obviously goes Giannis, Middleton, and Drew. And on Brooklyn, it's just those three guys. So if you want to just think those three guys just carry the load like they did against Boston and taking the under and guys like Blake Griffin. Yeah, I do think the data team obviously has done an exceptional job with that product. And it makes sense in certain ways. And this matchup is just so like friendly in terms of just the pace, and it's just going to go up and down just because Brooklyn's going to be involved and they're not trying to slow down Milwaukee whatsoever. So it's very interesting to look at it from a betting prop aspect of things. And maybe for those who are doing both, you can kind of hedge your assets tonight using that prop tool.
And also you can see on the screen here, our producer Chris is pulling it up, and some of the numbers actually have changed since I was just last looking at the screen. So that's something that just really the numbers are updating in real time with Odds Shopper, and that's being pulled into this tool along with Awesemo's projections. So keep that in mind. Really a good way. I know people have been doing really well with the ROI stuff and the win percentage tools on Odds Shopper all year. So this is one simpler way to do it and integrate it into your process if you want for whatever sites you can bet on. We also got the gym. It's always funny people are talking in caps in the chat because I'm like, I'm not sure if they're angry or just a person who perpetually has their caps lock on for some reason. But Jim saying Claxton played 5 minutes against the Bucks this season. I'm confused. You can't necessarily look at the previous games to indicate results. Like that's why we talked about DeAndre Jordan to go like maybe he does get back in the rotation. You'd have to look at the recent games though, where DeAndre Jordan, a guy not playing in a month and then suddenly being summoned into duty and playing meaningful minutes is not the most common occurrence. Certainly can happen, which is why we talked about it. But I think Ryan, I kind of close the loop on some of the mediocre Brooklyn big men here. Though Claxton, I think better than mediocre, so that's me into him. But just a guy who's getting the minutes, like he's clearly proven to be ahead of DeAndre Jordan in the rotation. That's why it could be that Claxton gets more minutes. Even they could view him as being the same that they viewed DeAndre Jordan in the earlier games, and because Claxton's ahead in the rotation, maybe he does get those minutes that DeAndre Jordan had initially.
Yeah, and the thing, it's a one-game slate, so I don't think we want to overthink it too much. If someone is getting some sort of significant rotational run in terms of minutes, they're kind of automatically in play in terms of an option to look to on a one-game slate, just because any given game, Claxton can go out there and put up a quick 5 points, 5 rebounds with 3 blocks in, I don't know, 8-9 minutes. He's shown that in the past, and that's why I'd be willing to take some chances on a guy like him, just because he's shown that in the past. Well, he is not as risky as a play like DeAndre Jordan, because DeAndre Jordan hasn't played in so long. While something why you would want to go to DeAndre Jordan is just because he opens things up for you to potentially gem in another stud. And on a game environment like this, when there's guys like Giannis, Harden, Durant, Kyrie, Jrue Holiday, and Middleton, that extra stud is so valuable to just give you that raw point up. Like raw points matter in any slate, but that additional stud output of like 40 points, that's why you would go to take some risk like a guy like Jordan or even Claxton, who comes in at 2,800. He's not that expensive, but he just needs to have one really good game, and it could definitely happen. So that's why I think taking some chances on a guy like Claxton, especially a big man like him, big guy like him, can definitely pan out.
So let's talk about some more of the values before we talk about the Nets big three, because I think we could certainly, they're going to be fairly obvious plays to talk about, but some of the values maybe less so. And we've hit on the big men. One value play for Brooklyn that I talked about a second ago or a couple minutes ago about being decently owned, Landry Shamet does seem like he's going to come up in an optimizer a lot. And he is a play that a player who's been getting minutes enough recently where he's been in that backcourt rotation. Certainly even in the clinching game last time out against Boston was getting pretty good run for himself. And today, Ryan, does seem like lineups will be building around him. He and Tyler Johnson, two of the value plays on the Nets that do seem like they're projected for a good hunk of ownership and are core parts of what you're going to see on an optimizer, because they open up your ability, like Ryan's talking about, to get more studs into the mix, get all these guys who are going to actually give you the floor and the ceiling combined. But what's your comfort level with Shamet and Tyler Johnson? They're going to get some looks from three, you would think, especially Shamet. So I think Shamet in particular is a guy I'm willing to get above the field on, even though I absolutely hate the play. And I know there's a million ways it can go poorly, but Shamet, Tyler Johnson, I guess any of the other value plays here that you want to bring to the mix. Actually, let's save the PJ Tucker conversation, but Shamet and Tyler Johnson for you, Ryan, how willing are you to go there?
So Landry Shamet is a very enticing tournament play today. This Bucks defense, if you see the way they play, they don't want anyone to get in the paint. They are willing to let you to take that open three. And especially on DraftKings, where Shamet gets that 3-point bonus at $1,800. Yeah, he's fine. It's a very nice price option where you kind of want him to kind of get hot from the outside and knock down 3-4 3-pointers in limited play. He's done this numerous times in his career, and in the playoffs, he's shown it just as recently in the last series. So I think Shamet, someone who I think is going to play some minutes regardless. I think the upside is very nice, where he can open things up for you, similar to a guy like DeAndre Jordan, a little bit more confidence in him, because I think Shamet is more likely to play significant rotation run, not significant rotation run, a rotation or two, like he has been, like he did in the first round. So, and another plus point for Shamet is this is the way the Bucks defense is playing. Like I said, they're willing the opposing team to take wide open 3-pointers. If you were to look at their wide open 3-point percentage, I think the Bucks were compared to the last 3 years, this was their worst year that they've had, and that's why a lot of teams were playing a lot better against them all year long. And the Nets just love shaking wide open threes the way their offense functions are around when KD, Harden, and Kyrie are driving out. They're either kicking out to guys like Joe Harris, Jeff Green, or Landry Shamet for that wide open three.
Yeah, and I think that's something that too with Landry Shamet, where he's not quite as good of a 3-point shooter as Kyrie, or not quite as good of a 3-point shooter as Joe Harris. So he, to me, is the guy who could actually end up being open, though I guess he won't necessarily play a ton of court time alongside Kyrie. He'll definitely be in for one of Kyrie or Harden for the most part. But to me, in the spot, Shamet putting up 5.5 3-pointers a game, I have a lot higher confidence in him than Tyler Johnson. These guys are going to be comparably owned according to the ownership projections, it looks like. So to me, I'm going a lot more Shamet. I'm going lighter on Tyler Johnson. And I don't know if you feel differently, Ryan, but Tyler Johnson projected for 9 minutes today is at the minimum salary, so maybe he opens some things up. Definitely not going to be as much of a consideration on FanDuel, I would think. But for the DraftKings showdown slate, are you willing to get to Tyler Johnson, or are you more with me that you can play some of them, but the better move is probably need to play Shamet?
Yeah, I think Shamet has obviously a greater upside, but Tyler Johnson, similar to the DeAndre Jordan situation, that 1K min price salary, I know it's an $800 difference between Shamet and Johnson, but $800 on this slate is a lot because it gives you that flexibility to go somewhere else. And you're just going to have to look at that raw point situation can that extra stud pan out for you more times than not? It's I think it ends up just being a 50-50 thing at the end of the day, but I just feel more confident going to a guy like Shamet who has shown an upside. Well, Tyler Johnson, I'm not sure how real those minutes are. There was a couple blowouts that happened. I think 8 to 10 minutes is more realistic than 13 to 14 minutes. And those 3-4 minutes matter a lot, especially when a guy's priced at 1K, because those 3-4 points is the massive difference between you coming first in showdown and you coming like 5,000 in showdown. That's how crazy the spread can be in terms of just how good the lineups are and like how close they are at the end of the day. So even half a point, a quarter point, that last rebound, that last free throw just changes your lineup so drastically. And I've been on the bad side of things. I've been on the good side of things. So it's just really kind of a crazy sweat. That's why this showdown single game format is really fun to play.
Yeah, if Josh Richardson had one more 3-pointer yesterday, I would have been in first place with, I think, like 10 people for 7K or something. It would have been more than that, but would have been for a 7K payout. Instead, I ended up in like 180 something. I forget what it even was, but it might have actually been in the thousands because of the big chop. But like, you're right. It's like a very big swing here. It's all about the volatility of it all and your willingness to sort of embrace it for the positives. And I'm intrigued by the 1K price tag. And if you get a little bit of it, I think it's just an exposure to a lineup that can get there and also maybe decrease the ownership product a little bit for some of these guys. Speaking of the thing that normally decreases the ownership product, Ryan, on the other side, PJ Tucker, not necessarily going to be the case today. A quarter of the field playing him. We know the PJ Tucker situation, but I am with you that I think there are some pathways for Tucker to play more minutes. He can be more versatile defensively. That's the only reason he's still in the league at this point and has been treated as something of a commodity or, moving around the league and being valued by Houston previously. But PJ Tucker in the spot, I think, is a value play that you can use. I certainly have no faith in it. I certainly am willing to accept the consequences, but at 2,400 as a pivot to Shamet, as a guy who's going to be 25% owned, I think he's an appealing play relative to however appealing PJ Tucker can be.
Yeah, so PJ Tucker is someone who I expect to get play a lot more minutes in the series because of his versatility, the way he can switch. He was already playing 23, 24 minutes the last two games against Miami, and now I think Brook Lopez's minutes are he's gonna lose some minutes, and I think PJ Tucker is the immediate beneficiary as they're more likely going to move Giannis to the 5, I think. And Tucker just has the ability to contain guys like Harden and Kevin Durant to a certain extent. So Tucker, obviously, $2,400 on DraftKings. FanDuel, he comes in, I believe, not because of the puzzle over there on FanDuel. He comes in at 7,500. He's not as exciting of a play just because you're rostering one less player over there on DraftKings. He's definitely more of an option. And for PJ Tucker at 2,400, depending on the way the game script pans out in this matchup, I think he's a solid value option just because you're looking for cheap guys who can potentially just get you that extra stud or get you that upgrade in captain to another like better player. So that's why Tucker is going to be in play, especially on DraftKings. And I think his minutes have a potential to go up. And Tucker, not someone who you're going to roster very often on a main slate, if at all, but I think you can definitely consider him as a pretty okay option on DraftKings. And I say that hesitantly because it's PJ Tucker. We know he can play 30 minutes and just have 5 points, where that's 2,400. It'll certainly almost not kill you, but it will definitely not help you to anything great.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. He's just a function of just getting a lineup that's going to kill a little bit less ownership. And maybe there's some pathway for him to fall into a few rebounds, knock down a few corner threes against a defense that's not very good, I think is certainly a realistic possibility. So I'm willing to be there, especially because I was getting less in the field of Brook Lopez anyway. So I think, Ryan, you giving that narrative gave me some peace of mind that for my PJ Tucker exposure, like it is what it is. And that's always how it's going to be. But maybe there's a pathway for him to get to the high 20s minutes somehow. And that's definitely one where he can be useful. Let's talk about some of the other fringe bucks, I suppose. Pat Connaughton, Bryn Forbes certainly was a heater during that Heat series, no pun intended, but was a guy who just came off, was knocking out a lot of shots, certainly could do it again. The issue for me with a guy like Forbes, the Heat, even though they were down this year, they're still a team that was fairly competent defensively and doing what they could to, make it tough on Middleton, make it tough on Giannis as much as they could, make it tough on Drew Holiday. And for Forbes, I think that means being open. Whereas the Nets, I don't think they're making it tough on anybody. So I just don't see the upside for Forbes. That said, he is projected for 5% ownership because his price tag is up enough for the showdown that he is going to project horribly, I think, on any projection system. So Forbes, Connaughton, I guess let's start with those guys. Are you feeling any interest for either of them? Because personally, I would go more Connaughton's way relative to price tag. And I think a decent chance you're starting and hopefully getting a few more minutes for his defense.
Yeah, so $2,000 on a stud-filled one single game showdown contest like today. Yeah, I would take the savings. Yes, Forbes can definitely have that 3-point upside, rack up like 5-6 3-pointers like he did in, I think, games 3 and 5 against the Heat, where he just shot lights out. $5,600 is a lot for a guy like Bryn Forbes. So, especially on a single game slate, if you are building many lineups and you land on a few Forbes, yeah, that's completely fine. It's a one game slate. He's going to get around 20 minutes. Him and Connaughton seem like they're splitting the DiVincenzo time. So, but $2,000 in Connaughton, if you were going to just look at a median basis, I think they fall a lot close to each other over time. If you were to play this game 100 times, then I think Forbes and Connaughton come out a lot closer more times than not, especially when you get $2,000 in savings on DraftKings. That's why I would prefer to go into Connaughton. Over there in FanDuel, it's going to be tough for me to even go to Forbes at $9,000. That is a lot for that format for him, where you're not getting the 3-point bonus. Connaughton comes in at $7,000. So you're also saving $2,000 over there as well. So I believe Connaughton is the man at $10 on Yahoo. So he opens things up over there. And I think Forbes is $10 over there. So if you want to play Forbes, I think you can play him on Yahoo, where he's the min, and while kind of not playing him on DraftKings and FanDuel, where he's priced up at pretty much his ceiling price tag. I've ever seen Bryn Forbes price like that.
And it's going to be interesting to see the minutes update because, as the chat just pointed out, everybody at once clearly excited to be a part of the PJ Tucker movement. He is starting for the Bucks today. The assumption would be, I think, that he would replace Connaughton, who started that last game against the Heat. And I guess that, to me, would knock Connaughton down a little bit. I think it also has to knock Forbes down a little bit because those guys are now going to be competing for the same swath of minutes off the bench. And Tucker, Ryan, I think, has to be now the preeminent value play on the slate. I can't even stop from him, but it's like he's going to be chalky and he is going to look like a fantastic value if Awesemo has him at around 30 minutes.
Yeah, and if he's going to play up to 30 minutes of PJ Tucker, what do you want from him? He can find his way to 15, 16 points. We're not looking for outstanding rates on a one-game slate. We're just looking for fantasy points. And if he's going to come out of a good salary play, yeah, I guess it's PJ Tucker's showdown single game season for us. And I don't know where you draw the ownership line. Can PJ Tucker get in foul trouble and burn you against this lethal Brooklyn Nets team? Yeah, it could happen. But at $2,400 on DraftKings, I think he doesn't need to do much. He can definitely corral the rebounds. I'm not sure if he's going to start for Connaughton. There is a slight chance Brook Lopez goes to the bench. I'm not sure what we have the official word, but I do think there's a non-zero chance that Brook Lopez doesn't start this game. But I'm not sure. I'm just going off what I've seen in rotations for this.
Yeah, I think the news item was just that he's starting and not who he's replacing, though I am seeing some people in the replies on this one tweet saying that it is Lopez, but I don't think that's actually confirmed. But I think he's starting for Connaughton because that to me just makes a little more sense. And then maybe you just play Brook off the floor and then Connaughton comes on for a little more defense and versatility. But I would assume that's how it goes. But we'll keep an eye out for it. And obviously, Live Before Lock is coming on after us with Eytan and Greg, so they will certainly have some lineup news there, and we'll absolutely know this. It's a locking slate. It's only one game here, so you're going to know the news. That's the one positive here that we have, that maybe we've gotten not so spoiled by it throughout the course of the NBA season. So Tucker, I think I really want to see these minutes. Brook Lopez, though, I guess, assuming that he does start, Ryan, we had a question here about him being a captain play potentially for a large field on a DK GPP from D Owens 89. I think he's a fine play at captain. I think he's one that, to me, I didn't quite like as much because I feel as though Middleton's a little under-owned at captain. Durant seemed decently under-owned at captain. Really, everybody who is a stud who isn't Giannis, to me, looks under-owned at captain enough that I don't think you have to get there to try to get different. But Ryan, how would you feel about Brook Lopez as a captain? And I guess would you consider it a priority relative to his 1.7% expected ownership at the position?
I'm really concerned. Obviously, I just pointed out that I have a feeling he might not start. And there's just there's a really, really good chance that he just gets played off the court against his Brooklyn team. So can Brook Lopez just launch a bunch of threes and get that double-double? Can you put up a 20-12 game? Yeah, Brook Lopez has that in his bag, but I just don't think it's as likely to happen against this Brooklyn Nets matchup. That's why I'm going to be under the field on a guy like Brook Lopez. I really want to see that starting lineup. If Brook Lopez doesn't start, it's going to have going to be really tough for me to even consider him a strong option whatsoever. I do think he'll be very, very low on regardless. So if he starts and he's still low on, I think just being with the field, I'm going to be content with doing that decision. So it's going to be really interesting to see what that starting lineup is. I do think it's going to be interesting to see what the Nets do, just hearing this starting lineup as well. Could be an interesting chess match by Steve Nash, just to see what he might want to counteract. Them missing Jeff Green really just might change things up, where they might just be forced to starting Blake Griffin, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, Brook Lopez at captain, I'm not that excited to do that. If you're falling on some of it and you're building a lot of lineups, I don't think I go to Brook Lopez if I'm building 3 to 5 lineups in captain, especially on DraftKings. And tough for me to go there on FanDuel. I can't be playing Brook Lopez an MVP or star. If you fall on some pro Brolo, your lineup's going to be very, very unique. But keep in mind the risk of him just being played off the court.
A lot of YouTube chat talk about Tucker. Here's one from Da Bajanman. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but I don't know what you're going for there. Bahanman. Just stop with this Tucker nonsense. He's one of the worst fantasy players. And then he adds in for his credibility. I was tied for first on FanDuel and DK last night, so I'm not listening to this trap. I feel like if all the nights to claim that as a resume builder, probably not the one to do that. But I certainly get it. It's really not about Tucker himself as a play, though. Like, again, I could tell you, like, my best lineup yesterday, one that was in first for a lot of the first half on DK, or, tied for first in the first half, a lot of DK, and then was in the hunt at the end of the game was Josh Richardson putting up less than 10 fantasy points, because that's a construction that worked to get you to all the plays you needed to get to, including Reggie Jackson at captain for how my construction worked. And I think that's something to keep in mind here. It's not about Tucker as much as it is the fact that he's at a price tag that's cheap. And if he can play 30, 35 minutes, there's something that Adams talked about before with Robert Covington, where certainly Covington, a more productive player, like PJ on the year, just a 0.5 fantasy point per minute guy. But if he's out there for 35 minutes and scores 0.5 fantasy points per minute, that's 17 and a half fantasy points, or 35 minutes rather, 17 and a half fantasy points. Like, that's enough to get into a winning lineup. And that, to me, is the reason you play Tucker. If he sucks, fine. If he ends up being like 75% owned in the ownership projections by the time those refresh, then fine, like, don't play him. But I think, Ryan, people sometimes need to understand, like, it's not about a guy being a good player or being washed or not washed or whatever, as much as, hey, he's going to get minutes. And normally when the guys get minutes, something is going to happen, because that's just the nature of the NBA, especially in a fast-paced, high-scoring, lots of shots game.
Yeah, and especially a guy like him. And we should be more confident in going to Tucker in his minutes because he's starting. And I think obviously we know his downside, and he's priced like that as well because of his downside at $2,400 on DraftKings. And I think he makes for an exciting value play over there on DraftKings. But I do think we should touch on some of these Brooklyn Nets.
Yep, let's get to it. And I'm sorry, just the Tucker thing's always flying. And somebody's saying Tucker starting is bad for Tucker usage, just Kick's good. I know Kick's good's a regular here, so I'm hoping he's doing that as a bit, because I don't think the Tucker usage necessarily is going to fly that high off the bench. The Brooklyn starters, though, or the Brooklyn stars, we need to hit on. James Harden going to be the highest priced guy on the DK slate. Also, obviously going to be highly priced on FanDuel as well. Kevin Durant, highly priced. Kyrie Irving, the cheapest out of the group here. Certainly the one who's had tournament upside that we saw just a few games ago against Boston, but also a guy whose usage rate has been pretty down on the year when playing court time alongside all these guys. Since Harden came back to the lineup after his injuries, Kyrie down to a 24% use rate, Harden at 25%, but the Kyrie assist rate being so low was very jarring to me, that he was at under 10% assist rate since Harden's been back. And I think that's something that can level out a little bit more, but I couldn't even project him that low because I think he would have looked too unappealing to play. But definitely some concerning numbers for him Rayen, that I feel like would push me more towards Durant and Harden. I feel like Durant is the most comfortable play for me to make just relative to salaries and all of that. But Harden certainly in the mix too, definitely a guy who can break the slate with a triple double, even if he doesn't put up a ton of points today. But how are you feeling about the big three, and which of them is a priority for you?
Yeah, for me, it's going to be James Harden. I just think he has the greatest ceiling among those three. And I mean, obviously, that's nothing like bold whatsoever, especially when we get the triple double bonus, double double bonus over there on DraftKings. That's why Harden's a very, very appealing play over there. Obviously, the most expensive player on the slate on DraftKings. So it's going to be tough to see. And it's going to be interesting to see what the field does with obviously some sort of newfound value opening up with PJ Tucker and Harden's ownership. But I really like Harden. And for those who don't know, James Harden and Giannis are really not that friendly to each other. There was a time where Giannis didn't draft him in that All-Star game, and he kind of took shots at Harden. And there's the underlying narrative between this in the series is James Harden and Giannis don't get along that well. Oh, that's based on that. I believe that interaction was pretty obvious. They didn't like each other in the way they play games. So it's very interesting to see how that narrative translates throughout the series. I love James Harden in this series, and he's going to be the reason why I think the Nets win this game and win this series. I have the Nets winning the series in 5 games. I think it's going to be pretty close series throughout. It's just going to be a competitive gentleman's sweep. I believe the Nets offense, as weird as it sounds, is going to overcome defense. Usually defense wins championships, but this Nets offense is by far one of the best I've ever seen. I think the 16-17 Warriors are the best basketball team I've seen since 2000 onwards, where I've been kind of a basketball fan, but I think this Nets team is offensively just there. It's right there for them. So it's going to be an exciting series. I hope it's close. I hope we get 7 games, but I think the Nets should take care of business. But going to Kevin Durant, he has been absolutely sensational in this series, in the playoffs so far, and kind of has a kind of a greater floor than Harden in a weird way, just because Durant's shots are always going to be on the table for him. So he's a very contrarian MVP option on DraftKings, great captain option on DraftKings, because we know what Kevin Durant can do. He's going to find a way to take mid-20 shots. He's going to be efficient from the field. And he was very solid against the Milwaukee Bucks in the season. He had 58 and 3/4 fantasy points, 62 and 53 in the in DraftKings story in the 3 times he played. Kyrie Irving only had 1 good game. Keep in mind the trio never played together against this Bucks team. So if you're looking at box scores from recent, that has never happened. So, and Kyrie Irving is just kind of like not going to be facilitating as much, much more scoring dependent. Can Kyrie go ahead and drop 40 real life points? Yeah, but it's just not as likely to happen with the insertion of Harden and Durant playing alongside him. So for me, it's Harden, Durant, and Kyrie. And that's how my ownership is going to kind of indicate it as well. I think Harden captain, it really is going to be low owned, where he's kind of if you want to get over the field on a guy like him, the most expensive player. And he has an upside, pretty big upside. And there's a chance that he can be the highest scoring guy by 20 points in this type of game environment. So I really like taking some chances on Harden MVP, Harden captain, especially captain, where I think he's going to potentially a little low owned in this type of game environment.
So this may be controversial, but I actually do have Durant project a little bit better than Harden. And I do think with the decreased ownership as well, in the most recent run that we had that I at least imported before the show, 53% ownership for Durant projected compared to 61% for Harden. To me, I just think Durant's not a better matchup necessarily, but a guy who's going to sort of get the usage. He's had the highest usage of all these guys. He also rebounds a little at a higher rate than Harden. If you do think that maybe there's going to be less tough rebounder and Brook Lopez in the mix necessarily, maybe that does mean too that Durant can find more ways to rebounds. And Harden is a triple double threat. I certainly do get that. And I know there comes with some risk, but I will be above the field on Durant and under on Harden, I think, barring something weird happening in my final run here. And that's just one of the plays I'm making. Rayen, I love always going counter to something you say after all the success you've had, but I just like Durant. To me, just a little bit of savings there, a little more comfort. And to me, I might believe in Middleton and Holiday a bit more. I think the construction that I like the most was getting to a little bit of Giannis, Middleton, Holiday, and some sort of cycle, and then getting to Rand as the one coming back, and then sort of whatever else fills out the rest of the lineup. And I think it's hard to do that to the same levels with James Harden. So that to me is a big part, where if you think all of Milwaukee goes off, and I am a believer in them in the series too, I think they can win the series. And I think actually I would take them to win the series relative to the markets too. I love what I saw from Milwaukee against the Heat. I think they are on a real vengeance tour for themselves, and Drew Holiday is certainly going to bring that energy. So to me, I like Harden. I have no issue if you're going to play him, but to me, I am team Kevin Durant, team Snake today, ride or die. So
my concern with Kevin Durant is, it's not a concern. There's I do think we're going to expect more Giannis on KD in this series than we did in the regular season matchup. We saw a lot of Middleton on Kevin Durant, and that's just like I just think that doesn't for like it doesn't help KD if he's going to see a lot more Giannis on offense. So Giannis is obviously a world-class defender, a potential defensive player of the year candidate as well. So that's the only reason why I'm not as bullish as Kevin Durant as you are. But obviously, it's Kevin Durant. He could score 60 real life points. There's no questions asked, and that really is going to make things really interesting. Obviously, Joe Harris is expensive for his thing. He's going to be left open on some wide open threes. He makes for a very contrarian captain option. I think Harris is going to play around 30 minutes, and we saw that huge upside game against Boston in that I believe it was that game 3 where he went off for 43 and a half fantasy points, went 7 to 10 from 3, kind of just challenging his inner Klay Thompson on the role in this team. So don't get me wrong, Klay Thompson is a much better basketball player than Joe Harris, but 3-pointer wise, I mean, we get that 3-point bonus on DraftKings. Harris makes a very interesting low-owned tournament option just because he's not going to project that well in terms of just projections and median projection in this type of matchup, but we know that he has that upside, and 3-point bonus definitely helps him over there on DraftKings.
And obviously for a showdown, everybody's in play, but Bruce Brown, I think another guy just we sort of need to throw in here. Somebody was earning more minutes towards the end of that Boston series, and there's a lot of volatility to his minutes too. So I think you are taking on a little bit of risk, but he's projected for under 25% ownership on DraftKings. I have no reason to think that's going to be that higher than the ownership that will actually get it locked. So Bruce Brown to me just another guy who can find some easy rebounds, can also find some assists given the fact that the Bucks are going to give up those threes. So Brown, just another guy in play that I feel like wouldn't be the worst. And Ryan, I think the only guy in the rotation that we haven't mentioned, I guess, besides Jeff Teague, who probably should not be played very much either, but Bobby Portis. I feel like Bobby Portis, Bruce Brown, these guys kind of similar price tags. Do you have a lean between those two or anybody else in that 4 to 6K range that really stands out for you?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what happens with this Bucks rotation starting lineup, if who's going to the bench. Because if Brook Lopez is going to be coming off the bench with Bobby Portis, it doesn't help Bobby Portis whatsoever. And then we'll see what that starting lineup is like. And Bobby Portis might get some blowout runs sometimes in showdown lineups. I do build a game script where if a team is going to blow out someone, and in terms of blowout run, guys like Bobby Portis might potentially play the first half of the blowout run, and then other guys who might touch the court. I don't know if Jeff Teague gets much blowout run, but he's the min salary. Jordan Nora is a pretty solid fantasy contributor in minutes played throughout the season, so he's another blowout run option. And those are the guys who I'd consider in blowout run. I don't know about Sam Merrill and Alex Dupont and Thanasis. I don't know if he's healthy enough to play, but keep in mind, sometimes if you predict blowout run, it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, the payouts are pretty nice, especially in showdown single game. Going to Bobby Portis, tough to go there. I think a guy like PJ Tucker, and you're just going to save that much thousands of dollars, where there's a good chance they fall in the same fantasy point range today. So keep that in mind. He's going to be contrarian and low on. Maybe Portis gets going off the bench. There's a pathway for him to get there, but it's not as big as a guy like PJ Tucker paying off that price tag. And outside of that, I think we've touched everyone else. I think Blake Griffin probably deserves a little bit more credit. I guess he's 4K. He's a starter, has the upside of playing 25 to 26 minutes. So I think there's an upside there. He's just not seen it so far. He could hit the 3-point shot. Keep that in mind. But it's going to be an exciting series. I'm really excited for the series. Probably the best second round matchup there is in the NBA this playoffs.
And just to close it out here before we hand it over to the Live Before Lock crew, Eytan and our pal Greg Ehrenberg coming. I guess I say our pals, Eytan and Greg Ehrenberg. They're both pals. I shouldn't single them out like that. PJ Tucker now projected for 27.4 minutes today from our Awesemo data team. So keep that in mind. Connaughton and Forbes down to 20.8 and 22.8 respectively. These guys will talk more about that coming up. Make sure to go follow at Rynpak, one of the top DFS players out there. Also an all-around swell guy. So throw him the follow now. Also follow at Chris Spags. Follow at Awesemo_com. Make sure to hit the like button before you go too. I didn't pander for likes so much today because we still had a ton to talk about, even with a one gamer, but we appreciate the support a bunch. Get us to 200 likes here. We got over 800 people in the room. So that seems like a reasonable number. Heading into Live Before Lock next with Eytan and Greg. Stay tuned on the stream. We'll see you guys again soon. Good luck.
That's brutal about Rom, huh?
Yeah, especially because I didn't get bets in on time.
So books have to return that, right?
They can do whatever they want.
No, I mean, I understand that, but I'm saying we've seen a couple of these returns with bad breaks in general, like the last year, as more people start betting. It's almost like, yeah, don't worry, we'll give it back to you.
Yeah, I assume that there's a good chance they'll probably just pay out Rom bets as winners. I know that's what it's not going to matter because he's won Rookie of the Year anyway. But so like LaMelo Ball, when he first broke his wrist, DraftKings just was paying out all LaMelo Ball Rookie of the Year bets as winners because he was like minus 1,500 at the time.
Yep. Okay. I mean, he's got a 6-stroke lead, so. Okay. All right, welcome in. We are right here. We didn't go anywhere, and we appreciate you sticking around as well as we get you ready for a gigantic game coming up in an hour from now as everything will lock. So we are live before lock. Myself, Greg Ehrenberg in the house. You can follow us both on Twitter at Ehrenberg DFS, at Shander Show for me. The show brought to you by Prize Picks, and we have a lot to talk about across the board tonight, Greg. So first and foremost, always a pleasure. Last time I saw you on screen, you and Josh were burying us because myself and Adam we didn't have the like count high enough, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that ahead of time, so let me preemptively apologize for the poor performance last time, the shit lead-in that we left you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't care about that. That's more of a Josh thing. Here's what I care about, though. I mean, it matters to an extent, right? Because it helps with the YouTube algorithm, but it's much more important that we get people to subscribe to the channel during the show, which we have no way of tracking that. We have no clue if people subscribe or don't subscribe, but it's vastly more important to overall the amount of views we get on shows and whatnot. So yeah, liking helps. We like people to subscribe, but every once in a while it's like, hey, if you guys subscribe, I'll give away this information. I just pretend they do. I have no clue. I have no way to track that during shows.
All right, so you just heard it right now. You want to make sure you subscribe to the Awesemo channel, and Greg Ehrenberg is going to drop the nugget of all nuggets that has not been dropped at all today across any of the shows on any of the platform here on Awesemo.com. So all we need from you is a subscription. Be nice to hit the like button as well. You want to share it to the world, you have that option. And then, of course, the notification bell, because you don't want to miss anything going on here. And it is funny because I was right there with you the last time on that shows earlier in the week where the Sixers were playing, and we got this news about Matisse Thybulle. And I was like, just living vicariously through you guys, just jacked up about the whole thing with T. So we'll get some lineup stuff coming in tonight as well. And just kind of looking at this game and looking at how you approach generally, Greg, the one game playoff slate, as opposed to maybe picking a random showdown game, captain mode game in the regular season.
It's still basically the same. The difference would be in the regular season, there's oftentimes value we could find, and it doesn't typically exist once we get to playoff games, just because teams run really tight rotations. And there typically aren't a lot of cheap guys to roster. And that becomes a little bit of an issue, particularly for a slate like this, because when we have so many high-end players to pay up for, Giannis, Harden, Durant, Kyrie, Jrue Holiday, Chris Middleton, we really need to find value at some point to be able to pay up for these guys. And unfortunately, this is going to be just awful news for everybody involved here. But PJ Tucker's starting for the Bucks, which means now that he becomes a value play that's really hard to avoid. I have him scoring 11.5 fantasy points today, and it still makes him the best value play overall, just because of the lack of other options and how much we need to pay up for the stars. So these slates, they just become different in terms of we have a lot of core guys that are playing around 40 minutes, and it's typically harder to find cheap value to make them work.
All right, so let's start there, right? Because that's the latest news. We'll go back to the chalk. We'll run captain modes throughout with Giannis and some others. The big three, of course, maybe the big four, if we want to use that term. But PJ Tucker, 2,400 on DraftKings, and clearly, as far as the ownership is concerned, is shooting up right now. I haven't projected 33% on our DFS ownership projections, which you have Awesemo.com, the Awesemo Plus package, $29.95. You have access to everything, including this year. You don't have to wait one day a week for it to be free. But looking at the workability, Greg, of the 2,400, the cost, knowing he's going to be out there at least early with minutes, is there any concern that Tucker may be too owned? I mean, we saw that with Boban last night, right? He was 85 or 90% owned across, it seems like, most lineups. Can PJ Tucker be too chalky for you to maybe stay away from?
I mean, not to stay away from entirely, just because the context of the slate, it's really hard to avoid. Also, we don't have Tucker project for nearly as much ownership as somebody like Boban last night. Boban,
Sure.
if I remember. And by the way, Boban was still in the optimal lineup. I know everybody won first last night. You came in first. I came in first. Yes. Probably 80% of the people listening came in first. I came in first, didn't even end up making money for the night because so many people tied for first place. But I mean, it's not like we've PJ Tucker projected for Boban type ownership. You said right there, we have low 30s for PJ Tucker. Boban ended up being 70% owned last night. Oh, that was also quite a bit higher than we were expecting. But yeah, I mean, I can't advocate for fading PJ Tucker outright on a 1-game slate because he's really cheap and he's starting. We need to find salary savings. I think there are guys to pivot to off of him though. But PJ Tucker, I think if you're playing multiple lineups, you want to get exposure to him.
All right. Well, on that note, on the premium Slack, and again, we have the premium Slack open. We have the super chat open for anything you want to hit Greg up with specifically. But back to the Slack, Harrison Edmonds specifically asking that about which Bucks you would play over PJ Tucker with him starting DK Classic 2-day contest, large field GPP, just to add a little context to it. So Bucks, you would play PJ Tucker over with him now starting, but then let's flip it to who you would maybe fade or at least play over Tucker.
All right. So, by the way, this is a way different question than addressing is there even a 2-day? I don't even see a 2-day slate on DraftKings.
For today and tomorrow, because we also have the game 7.
Yeah. I don't see a 2.
Oh,
I don't see it. I don't see it. Oh, okay. Yesterday and today.
That makes
all right.
More
so
sense.
Never mind.
Okay.
I was thinking you were talking about today and tomorrow. So
right.
All right. So for yesterday and today, let's see. What is the? I don't even have the. I assume he's mint price. I can't imagine if PJ Tucker is anything other than mint price.
He's 2,400 on DK.
No. For the 2-day
you're saying
contest.
On the 2-day. Got it.
Yeah, because he's asking about the 2-day contest. I assume he's 3,000, and I don't think there's any other viable players on the Bucks that would be 3,000, right? I think anybody else who's in that price range isn't even in the rotation today, so I don't think there's another choice.
Okay, fair enough. Now, you mentioned as far as moving away from Tucker on that lineup, other value you could find with Milwaukee, just going on this note of it's not going to be the PJ Tucker show, I promise, but just looking at other guys that you may like instead, knowing that you may have to pay up or maybe there's a cheaper option.
Yeah, so in terms of other cheap options, for sure, PJ Tucker is still a priority, but we could go to Tyler Johnson, also a very risky play. Tyler Johnson entered the Nets rotation kind of surprisingly last game. I didn't expect him to play, and then we ended up getting 11 minutes out of Tyler Johnson. He played the game before, except he played 16 minutes in that spot, and that was also a blowout. So we've seen him get some blowout run in the series against the Celtics, but nothing really substantial to the point where we would have expected 11 minutes because the games before he was playing 8-9 minutes, and half of that was blowout run. So getting double-digit minutes from Tyler Johnson, I'm expecting about the same from today. I gave him 10 minutes. Doesn't make him the best fantasy player in the world. It only has me projecting him for 4.8 fantasy points. But with that said, in the context of this slate, anybody that I think has a chance to be in the rotation that enables us to pay up for all the superstars in this game becomes viable. So Tyler Johnson, and by the way, 4.5, that could be more than PJ Tucker scores anyway. PJ Tucker stinks. So like 4.5 fantasy points for Tyler Johnson relative to the slate might not be a terrible thing. Other guys that I think are worth getting to on the really cheap end, Nick Claxton.
Yeah.
I don't expect him to start today for the Nets, but even with that said, I think that he is the best center overall on the Nets. And I think for this matchup, he's a better fit than DeAndre Jordan is. I think he's a better fit than Blake Griffin is. So even though Blake Griffin is going to start in all likelihood today, I think there's a good chance that Nick Claxton cuts into his minutes a little bit because I think his versatility and athleticism matches up a little bit better against the Bucks.
Somebody that, if he can get some opportunity, some minutes, there's going to be plenty of opportunity to get some buckets. I mean, that's why he's on the floor there. And Landry Shamet, 1,800. I imagine he becomes pretty workable as well. You're going to pay a little bit more than Tyler Johnson at that 1K, Greg, but you're probably going to get a more, at least a comfortable return, something you can live with Shamet as opposed to that big boom bust with Tyler Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, I think these guys are all fairly similar. At least the one thing that we'll say with Shamet is while I have him projected for a few more fantasy points than Tyler Johnson, he at least has more minute security, I think. In the series against the Celtics, we saw Shamet play 25 minutes, 19 minutes, 13 minutes, and 22 minutes. He's not a good points per minute fantasy producer. The usage isn't really there for him because of all the stars. But once again, here's a cheap guy that I think probably scores 8 or 9 fantasy points. And if we're going to see, 3 or 4 of the stars in this game go out and have massive games, we need to find the value somewhere. So Landry Shamet is also somebody who's, somewhat of a high priority play and works as a pivot off of PJ Tucker.
All right. So all of you who have joined the Awesemo Plus community here, we have a pretty cool offer for you where you can use our promo code NBA Live Before Lock. That's the name of the show here. Just use this NBA Live Before Lock at checkout for an Awesemo Plus Platinum account, and you'll get 15% off your first week. Always giving back, right? It's to get you on Awesemo Plus at $29.95, which is ridiculously cheap, affordable. And as you see constantly, we'll get to the Hall of Fame before we get out of here. Plenty of people are using this to their advantage. Well, now you can bump it up to the Awesemo Plus Platinum package and just use our code NBA Live Before Lock. 15% off your first week of Awesemo Plus, your new member there. All right, let's look at it from the top now, right? Because we got through the PJ Tucker news, the lineup news, and crunching a bunch of lineups here, especially with DraftKings. Giannis becomes the overwhelming favorite for a captain. And I wonder, just looking at that spot with Giannis specifically, and then maybe where a pivot is, even as down as a guy like Landry Shamet, where then you could work all 4 of the big 4 in your lineups.
Yeah, so to me, Giannis is the guy who I've projected for the most fantasy points in this game. And it's just the Nets usage is so difficult to predict because we've only seen these guys together now. What is it? A total of 9 games or 10 games or something this season where Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant were all active. And, there was one day where all 3 of them had a big game at the same time against the Celtics. I don't think that's going to be the most likely scenario where all 3 of them go off on any given day, but we know that Giannis is one of the best pointsmen and fantasy producers in the league, and he could get his fantasy points in so many different ways: points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, that he could have a really big fantasy game and isn't always relying on points or any one category. Whereas the Nets, I feel the best about James Harden, but there's a chance that Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, one of them could cede usage to the other. And at any point in time, I think there's going to be a whole lot of variability in the usage there. So just because I never know what to make of the usage for the next star guys, Giannis to me is the best pay-up option just because I think that he has the most secure fantasy outlook.
So with that said, now let's build Giannis in the captain spot. We're only going to be able to work 2 of the other 3, right? 2 of the big 3 in with Brooklyn, and you're not locked in, right, to one lineup. There are going to be multiple lineups and multiple different exposure, if you will, to multiple players. But where do you think the biggest fade is going? Is it Kyrie Irving? Maybe just because of when you look at the 3, he's probably the easier choice to say could have the lesser night from a production standpoint. A lot of people believe this is the James Harden game, but I wonder if you're looking at it over time, looking at multiple rosters, where the least amount of exposure would be for the big 3 on Brooklyn with Giannis.
Yeah, for captain. Me, it's So for me, overall, Kyrie Irving is the player that I have the least exposure to of the Nets stars. And it's just, I have him projected for less fantasy points than Harden and Durant. It's nothing really too much more complicated than that. We've seen the usage is the highest for Durant when Harden, Durant, and Irving are all on the court. Durant leads the team in usage rate. And then we have James Harden's able to do other things on the court, whether it be assists, rebounds, some defensive stats we've seen from him recently. So I have Kyrie Irving quite a bit behind Harden and Durant. Actually, I have it in tiers. It's Harden, and then there's like a 4-point drop off to Durant, and then there's like a 5-point drop off to get to Kyrie Irving. So with that in mind, I think that Kyrie's the weakest play of the 3. Not that makes him an outright fade or anything like that, except to me, in the build I have, I'm underweight to the field on him.
All right, a couple of super chats we'll get to. The premium Slack is up and running and cooking as well. And let's just look back. Charles, giving you a shout there, right, to go with Boban last night. Got him the win in his single entry. Now, I imagine he wasn't alone, right, in that win. But money is money, Greg, all right? And you're getting props for winning him that money, so take it. It doesn't matter if he was one of 1,000 that won. You were a part of that victory.
You know what's funny is somebody had DM'd me on Twitter, and they're like, "Oh, if I just switched this guy for this guy, I would have won the $100,000 last." I was like, "No, you wouldn't. Right. No, you wouldn't have. Nobody won it. You would have tied for a couple $100 with everybody else." But hey, listen, a win's a win. If you turn a profit, you turn to profit. And ideally, obviously, you'd rather not tie with 1 million people when you win first place. But it's better than losing for sure.
Well, he asked the best captain pick for tonight. It's not going to be Boban, but I think across the board, and look, there are going to be some pivots, and we can talk about a couple of pivots, especially on the Milwaukee side, maybe even as mentioned, a guy like Shamet to work in a bunch of other people. But it seems just across the board, when you're working the majority of the lineups, clearly Giannis is the best choice for cap. I mean, it would take him in foul trouble or an injury for him to not produce anywhere near those projections.
Yeah, I think that he's definitely the guy. Like I said, I have him project for the most fantasy points by a little bit of a margin. I think he has the most upside in this game. So to me, he is the best overall captain play. The ownership also dictates that, though. We have him projected for 30% ownership right now as the captain. So, a lot of the field is getting there. So there's a couple of ways to look at this question. Number one, who is the best overall captain? It's Giannis. I don't think there's that much debate about that. But then you have to start to look at some of the ownership. And then you try to figure out, who for less ownership is somebody that might be willing to get to at captain. And I think there's a couple of ways to go here. We could go really cheap with somebody like Landry Shamet, or hold our nose and go with PJ Tucker. And then you just hope for, in that situation, you're not even looking for a big game out of the cheap guy. You're looking for a big game out of all of the stars. And if the stars all go for 60 fantasy points, you're going to need all of them in an optimal lineup. And that's where you probably need somebody like a Landry Shamet or a PJ Tucker in the captain spot. So chalk play would be Giannis. I don't mind going cheap with like a Tucker or or somebody like Landry Shamet. Relative to ownership, I actually like Drew Holiday the most, projecting for single-digit ownership right now in the captain spot. I have him projected for more fantasy points than Chris Middleton. It is a little bit of a drop-off from, like I said, there's tiers. There's a drop-off from Giannis to Harden. There's a drop-off from Harden to Durant. There's a drop-off from Durant to Kyrie. And there's a similar drop-off from Kyrie to Drew Holiday. But still, it's going to be a favorable matchup for him. We know that the Nets, as good as they are on offense, they give up a ton of points on the other side. The total is massive for this game. And Drew Holiday, I think, probably played somewhere around 40 minutes in this spot. And also somebody who, with him at the captain spot, as opposed to somebody like Giannis, that probably affords us the flexibility to fit one more all-star in the lineup.
All right, one more on the Super Chat. Suave, how do you feel about Durant in the MVP spot on FanDuel and crunched a bunch of lineups? He's right there as a star in a lot of them, but I can't get to him as an MVP until it's really, Harden pops in there, but outside of that, again, it seems like, Greg, and I defer to you, it seems like we're in a similar scenario where Giannis, just based on the projections and based on what's expected, the minutes and the domination that he provides, especially the matchup that he should be able to really take advantage of, seems to be another solid fit here. I don't know if you look at Durant as a better or just a decent other option.
Relative to ownership, I actually don't think he's a great option because he's projected for fairly similar ownership in the MVP spot to Harden. We have Durant at 14% projected ownership and Harden at 20%. So while Harden is more popular, I actually think the gap should be wider just based on how much more fantasy points I've Harden projected for. So Durant, you could play him in the MVP spot, and I wouldn't see you absolutely have to change it, but I much prefer playing Harden or Giannis there.
All right, so now as we look at everything here, building from the captain spot and kind of looking at where Harden and Giannis, you mentioned Landry Shamet and working in all four of these guys. What about someone like Drew Holiday, where you're finding a little bit more middle ground in that? And maybe it's, if you are obviously going to try and work Giannis in on every lineup, but I wonder if there is in the back of your mind, Greg, the build, the just in case lineup, like the build Giannis does get in foul trouble. And we do start questioning the NBA and all this shit about, come on, are you kidding me? 2 fouls in the first quarter. I mean, look, it could happen. They're in Brooklyn. It's not like this is in Milwaukee. So do you even cross that path? Does that even come into your mind about building that type of lineup? And I wonder if you could bring in a Holiday or Middleton as a captain to start that path.
So I'll say if you have any lineups that don't have Giannis, they have to have Drew Holiday and or Chris Middleton. There's no scenario where I'd say like, okay, I'm not going to play Giannis, but I'm going to play Harden, Durant, Kyrie, and then 3 cheaper guys. Because like you said, in a scenario where Giannis fails, and also showdown contests are different from standard contests because we only have one game to choose from. So generally, whatever lineup you build, it's kind of corny to say, but people say it a lot, but it does hold true, is that it kind of has to tell a story. Right. So you have to say, like, what is the scenario Giannis fails? And like you said, one of the most likely situations is foul trouble, regardless if maybe you're a conspiracy theorist. You think that NBA games, that there's a call from Adam Silver about, hey, blow the whistle on this guy. Giannis gets into foul trouble a lot, right? It's a fairly likely scenario. We see it happen. I don't know what, 25% of Bucks games, Giannis ends up finding himself in foul trouble. And when Giannis is off the court, I'll bring up the on-off court numbers, but we see, fairly substantial usage bumps going to Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton. So with that in mind, like you said, we would expect in a spot where Giannis is in foul trouble, that there would be more production going to Middleton and Drew Holiday. So here I have it pulled up right here. Giannis's numbers off the court this year. We have a 32% usage rate for Chris Middleton, and he scores 1.33 fantasy points per minute, and a 28% usage rate for Drew Holiday, and he scores also 1.33 fantasy points per minute. So then you start to look that over the course of, 36 minutes or whatever it may be, and you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of, almost 50 fantasy points for each of these guys. So if anything happens to Giannis, Middleton and Drew Holiday both become stronger plays. And then I don't want to rattle on too long before throwing it back to you, but the other guy who would make sense as a value play in that scenario would be Bobby Portis, because he would be the first guy to come in off the bench if Giannis gets in foul trouble.
I want to go back to the premium slack. Two guys that came up individually, but curious to see how you pit them against each other. Charles Ward on the premium slack, Shamet versus Claxton as a cheap Brooklyn pick, and he follows it up. It's for a single entry small field again. So he's mining you for another small field tournament here.
All right. So Charles, who, by the way, Charles has been practicing for this all year. Charles has been even 10 game slates. Charles is usually playing the showdown contest in the middle of the slate. So he's been practicing for the playoffs.
Love it.
But yeah, for me, especially for a small field, it is Landry Shamet. I think if you're in a bigger field tournament, there's more upside and more contrary nature to playing Nick Claxton. But for a small field, I feel much more confident in Shamet's minutes.
Fair enough. All right. Again, the super chat up and running. So questions, throw them at Greg, the premium slack as well. All part of the Awesemo Plus package. And look, it's $29.95 for Awesemo Plus. But if you're just interested, you're here for the NBA DFS conversations, insight, here for Greg live before lock. Want to make sure you get everything in before you set your lineups. Well, we do have a couple of packages. The NBA DFS, the NBA weekly package is $60.95, and then it's $4.95 for the NBA weekly express package. But really, when you look at everything all encompassing, you're talking about $29.95 a week for a package that really gets you everything you need and wins you money. And we just keep showing it to you at the end of these shows with the Awesemo Hall of Fame, which I think I and everybody else qualify for last night, right?
Everybody did. Everybody's a Hall of Fame inductee. This is, people complain that like certain sports, the bar is too low for the Hall of Fame. That was last night's slate. Everybody made it. People were tweeting me, do I get in the Hall of Fame? Do I get in the Hall of Fame? I was like, look, I don't know what the rules are. I don't think we have some stringent type thing to get in the Hall of Fame, but we'll say you came in first last night. You qualified. Everybody got inducted.
Well, look, all I see, and one of the pieces of criteria is place in the top 3 of a contest with over 5,000 contestants. It doesn't say specifically, like there's no asterisk there that says 3 has to be top 3, not top 3, meaning like in golf where everybody's tied at the top. And then like the 4th person is 99 or 293. Like, hey, you're top 3 in a contest with over 5,000 contestants. I think you're in. You're right. It used to be a small room, like in Cooperstown. Now it's like Springfield in Massachusetts. They're letting everybody in.
Yeah, and I was gonna say also, what is there's no dead heat rules. I mean, there is for fantasy purposes. You don't just win first because you get it there, but there's no dead heat rules for the Hall of Fame. You don't get like a 15th of a Hall of Fame induction. You're at full go.
That's right. Yes. And there's no Writers Guild that you have to wait for like 5-10 years later where they finally via sympathy. Like, that's how I get in, is via like the writers 10 years later, just a sympathy vote. I think you're already in there like a couple of times over though, right?
I don't know how it works.
I thought you were just a member.
I don't know. I don't know how it works. I
don't have that gold coat.
No, I just read the thing when it comes up and I'm hosting the show.
Fair enough. Now we have to talk about, did you do stand-up before you were in DFS?
Yes. Yeah, that was so that was what I started doing out of college. The day after I graduated, I went into New York, did an open mic, and I did that for the abbreviated story. A lot of people who listen know this, but I'm sure
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I did the real quick overview. I did stand up right out of college. Also lived in New York after school. Did that for a little while. That was what I wanted to do. Then I got sick. I have Crohn's and colitis, and I was hospitalized for a little bit. I was really sick, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't work. I didn't know what I was going to do. I couldn't travel, so I couldn't do comedy. I wasn't able to get, like a desk job or anything like that. And then I just got lucky, and I was really into DFS, and I won a couple of tournaments over the course of like a week, like one for $8,000, one for $12,000. And I was like, hey, cool. My medical bills are paid for. And then I just started writing content because I didn't have anything else to do. I was, at home. I couldn't go anywhere. And I just kind of built up a little following. People grew interested in it. And then I got a writing job, and then I got another writing job. I was doing freelance work. Then I started to do some stuff on camera, did some TV shows. And, lo and behold, it just turned into a career. Not anything I planned. It just kind of happened, and I got really lucky.
Wow. This all started because I wanted to make sure I got your Twitter name right on the run sheet. So I just Googled your name and Twitter just real quick, because I always want to add another E after the H, and that's where I get tripped up. So I wanted to make sure that it wasn't misspelled on the run sheet. And like the second thing that pops up is former stand-up comedian, now DFS wizard. And I'm thinking, wait a second, you've got a great delivery. Like, you've got this really good deadpan, like solid delivery, and you rarely smile. So but you're really funny, right? So whenever it comes out, that it's going to be super funny. Where can I find this shit, man? Because I'll spend half time tonight watching your stand-up clips.
I had an old computer that had some stuff saved on it, because I used to have to send tapes to, like club owners or whatever, which, by the way, is all nonsense. There's a comedian who tells a story. I can't remember who it is, but it might be Joey Diaz, who there was a club owner who was like, hey, send a tape. And he never wanted to send a tape. So eventually he was like, hey, this is bullshit, but he wants to send a tape. So he sent him a blank tape with nothing on it. and a week later, the club owner got back, goes, hey, that's hilarious stuff. You're booked at the club. So there's a lot of that, like, where people ask to send tapes. So like, I had stuff saved to my computer, but it was an old computer and I don't have the files anymore. One of my friend's moms had told me that she saw that there was some online promotion that the Stand Comedy Club was running a show or whatever, and there was like a clip of me that was on their YouTube channel. But I don't know. I have some like sketch comedy stuff that I had written and acted in that it exists on the internet, if I might be able to find. Oh man, I smell a segment. That's all I'm saying. I smell a bit. It's going to have to happen at some point. I'm curious. Let's look at, there was a name that's been flying around. I heard Spags and Rynpak talking about him towards the end of the show. And now everybody with DeAndre Jordan now starting, there's a lot of question now about how to work him in this lineup, if at all. Another cheap option there at the bottom. Any exposure you anticipate with that news?
One sec. Let me look through. So Nets starting lineup: James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Joe Harris, Kevin Durant, Blake Griffin. So I still like, this doesn't change anything for me. I was assuming Blake Griffin was going to start. I was hoping there was a chance that Claxton would start. But to me, I mean, like, Blake Griffin's a good play on FanDuel for his price point at 9,000. DraftKings, to me, he's kind of a thin play. Yeah. And let me see. I'm going to refresh our ownership to see Blake, if we have.
And that's another thing too. Like, these guys, the cost of some, like Joe Harris, for example, right? I mean, you're paying a lot for somebody that's going to take out immediately the idea of one, at least, of the big four. So is that somebody that and Blake Griffin, of course, 3G's cheaper on DraftKings, so that's definitely more workable. But someone like Harris on that starting lineup, can you even justify getting to him at 7K?
It's really hard to, because especially the way this slate sets up. Like, what's the situation we're talking about where the lineup, having to make sense, and what's the outcome where it happens? So what has to happen for Joe Harris to be optimal at 7,000? Number one, he has to score. Could he get hot and do what he did the other day, where he hit like, what was it, 8 threes or whatever, and scores 25 fantasy points or whatever? That actually might not even be enough to be optimal on this particular slate. But for Joe Harris, he would have to hit a bunch of threes, and then a bunch of the stars would have to suck too. The price gap between Chris Middleton and Joe Harris isn't even that significant, right? We're talking about $2,000 on DraftKings. That's not nearly enough. I have Middleton projected for more than 10 more fantasy points. I have Middleton, Drew Holiday, all projected for 10 more fantasy points. Then you get to the other stars. They're all projected for 20 to 25 more fantasy points. So it's really hard for me to envision a way that ultimately we see Joe Harris in the optimal lineup.
With Blake starting, is there anything at 4K? You mentioned it doesn't do much, but again, if you're looking at maybe more of an outside lineup, not one that's consistently at the top when you're crunching and just looking at exposure, does Blake get much exposure at 4K?
A little bit, but once again, not a priority. He's started every game for the Nets for a while, and I'm not sure. Let me see if he's even ever scored over 30 fantasy points as a starter for the Nets. I'm just going to go through his box scores right now. At the very least, he started every game against the Celtics and didn't do much with those starts. And I assume that it's going to be, somewhere in the neighborhood of the same role. But all right, so his game logs in the playoffs against the Celtics. He played 20 minutes and scored 15 fantasy points, 20 minutes, 21 fantasy points, 25 minutes, 14 fantasy points, 18 minutes, 6 fantasy points, and 18 minutes, 11 fantasy points. He has he has a couple good starts against the Nets, although that was when Kevin Durant was out, where he scored 25 to 30 fantasy points. But for the most part, it's hard to really find a lot of usage to go to Blake Griffin. He's cheap enough that if you have him in a few lineups, it's fine. But no, he's a low priority play for me.
Got it. Makes sense, right? And we're looking around again, the lineups coming in, so trying to make sense of everything as far as anything that may change or shift. There was an interesting question on the premium Slack. We'll get some super chats up as well. Just hit us up on the chat there. But on the premium Slack, Swanson79, amazing job you all do. All of you, of course. I'm just here hanging. What amount of fantasy and it's a question that I think has some value. I don't know if you have it right in front of you about the amount of fantasy points Giannis had and that 25% you mentioned of foul trouble this year. And it doesn't have to be specific. It could just be the conversation of if he is in that scenario where he's limited, his minutes are limited, but we see ultra productivity like we have with an Embiid or a Jokic where 28 minutes can still net you 50 fantasy points. That may be like the one bulletproof armor against Giannis, even in foul trouble, to maybe avoid that backup type lineup without Giannis in it.
It's really hard to say how many fantasy points did he average when he was in foul trouble because there's not really a good way to monitor that. I'll say this, though. I have Giannis. Let's see. How many fantasy points am I expecting from him per minute tonight? I'm expecting Giannis for about 1.6 fantasy points, and I have him playing 40 minutes. So let's say that Giannis gets in foul trouble, 32 minutes. Is that a reasonable? Probably even more than that. Let's say 34 minutes if Giannis gets into foul trouble. So 34 minutes. And then multiply that. So that would be, we're looking at about 9.6 less fantasy points if Giannis gets into foul trouble. That's what I would expect. I would expect him to score somewhere around 9.6 less fantasy points if he gets into foul trouble.
And a ceiling, think about that. That's not that low. If he's having a great game, see, I think the sometimes we think, oh, guys in foul trouble, shitty game, it's shitty all around. He could be cooking. Like he could be playing really well. And as a result, in areas on defense, just maybe a bad charge, whatever it might be, that's the break, right? That unfortunately sends him to the bench. But to your point, he could very well be having a pretty good, if not really good game up until he's halted by that foul trouble. And then we know this. He's a superstar. He's their guy. He's going to be back in the game at some point, even if he is in technical trouble where he could be out with 2 more fouls. It's not like he's going to sit on the bench for an extended period of time.
Yeah, exactly. And even if we look at Giannis's minutes for most of the season, he gets limited more often because of blowouts than he gets limited because of foul trouble. And even though the foul trouble does kick up on occasion, it's not like all of a sudden, Giannis in foul trouble is going to play 18 minutes or something like that. It's the playoffs. And, I think coaches usually manage foul trouble in pretty dumb ways because a lot of teams are like, oh, no, our guy got in foul trouble. What are we going to do? Are we going to lose the game by not playing our best player? Or are we just going to keep him on the bench for a close end of game scenario that's never going to happen? And coaches oddly seem to decide that they'd like to lose more than just play their guys out in foul trouble a lot. But it's a playoff game against the Nets. And realistically, if Giannis doesn't use up all 6 of his fouls, right? If something happens where Giannis picks up 2 early fouls, if they send him to the bench early, they might just lose. And so I think they're going to have to play Giannis in any scenario well over 30 minutes. So there's nothing that I think limits him too much.
On FanDuel, just curious, kind of going back, as we talked a lot about captains in the showdown for DraftKings, but looking at those three slots, the MVP, the star, the pro, talked about Giannis and maybe getting to anybody else similarly in the captain mode with Giannis as the MVP. But if you are, and we can assume that we're slotting Giannis in as the MVP, I don't know if you're going to get to any other buck. In fact, I don't know if you're going to get to anybody other than Durant or Harden primarily in your star pro slots, correct?
Yeah. So I think, though, this more than anything has to do with pricing on FanDuel, like even less so than just a game theory perspective, because Giannis is 15,000, and then James Harden 15,500. If you look down to Drew Holiday's 12,500. Chris Middleton's at 12,000. I just think the Nets guys for, fairly comparable prices are just better fantasy plays. So it's hard for me to really get to them. If you aren't playing Giannis and then maybe you're saying like, hey, I'm going to James Harden instead, the primary run into Harden's actually more expensive than Giannis. So you haven't saved yourself any salary cap to be able to open up to getting to those guys.
Fair enough. So looking at a pivot, would it be again, and it seems like these are the really just based on the slate, the main options of pivot there would be either Middleton or Holiday for Milwaukee. Again, you're still having Giannis as your MVP, but if you were looking from a cost standpoint, would it be a Holiday or Middleton on FanDuel?
If I had to roster one of them, it's kind of interesting because I've Drew Holiday projected for more fantasy points, and I think he's the better play today. But Chris Middleton has a much higher usage rate when Holiday's off the court. Middleton has a 32% usage rate compared to a 28% usage rate for Drew Holiday with Giannis off the court. So overall, I prefer Drew Holiday on this slate. However, in lineups without Giannis, I actually think Middleton's a slightly better play.
Yeah. Does the ownership ever change? And just going back to this is going to be it. Like everybody's going to win, right? It's the one game slate. But does ownership change in that regard? And look, there isn't much difference here. So you're looking at 35% for Holiday, 33% for Middleton on FanDuel projected. So it's not like there is a large gap here, but let's just say hypothetically there was, and Holiday sits at 35, but Middleton is down in that 16, 17%. Is it going to make a significant difference? Is that going to be a mitigating factor for you when you are kind of throwing these two names up in the air?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors here, right? Because we have to say, first, what is the actual ownership gap? What do I have them projected for? On this slate, everything's kind of the same. Their ownership on FanDuel is almost identical. So at that point, it's just who do you think is the better play? To me, overall, like I said, it's Drew Holiday. In lineups without Giannis, I slightly prefer Middleton. But it's all going to depend on a slate-to-slate basis. For today, it doesn't matter, though.
All right, fair enough. And that's why, just trying to look at any little area here. So let's go back to kind of that bottom area. And I don't know, I mean, the ownership for someone like Claxton, if you look at it, on DraftKings, we mentioned Tyler Johnson as well. Super low cost guys that you could take advantage of on this game, this one game slate, below 20%. What about Bryn Forbes, man? No love for it's way too high. 5,600. Why are you going to take a risk on Bryn Forbes, Greg?
I'm not. Maybe somebody else might want to, but
5.4% of the people out there are.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's crazy that 5% of people are rostering him. I don't have him in my player pool personally. It's another issue. Like I don't have Joe Harris either, where some of these guys I just think are really expensive. And the other thing too is look at the starting lineup for the Bucks, where they don't have Pat Connaughton starting now. Pat Connaughton started last game. Just the fact that PJ Tucker's in, number one, that's somebody else we have to give extended minutes to in terms of projections. But that also tends to make me think that we're going to see more bigger lineups from the Bucks. That we're going to see a front court of Brook Lopez and PJ Tucker. We could see PJ Tucker play over 30 minutes today. That's within the realm of possibilities. And those minutes have to come from somewhere. It's going to be Pat Connaughton and Bryn Forbes if they're playing bigger lineups. So just the news that Pat Connaughton no longer starting, even though Bryn Forbes wasn't a starter before and he's still not a starter, I still think this decreases his playing time a little bit.
All right. See, look, man, you timing out somebody on the stream has got us an apology from that user. So there's always, what is the phrase? You get more bees with honey, right?
Listen, it's kind of standard thing, right? And so if people just blatantly throw out like just wrong news in the chat, like just give out wrong starting lineups, it doesn't help anybody, right? There's nothing you're doing. And by the way, also, anybody who thinks they're altering the ownership in any significant way, because how many people are actually active in the chat? Like a couple hundred over the course of the show. Right. So all you're doing, like maybe there's a couple of people who miss the news and they think you're saying something that's a fact. And you're not giving yourself any sort of advantage, which is dumb to try to lie to get an advantage anyway. But then the other thing also is you're just being a dick. Right. Like there's no good that's coming from it. You've maybe altered 2 or 3 people's lineups and then what? Right. So there's no advantage to be gained by just making up news and throwing it into the YouTube chat.
Now, I'll warn this guy out here. Spags is in the house, and he is not going to be as patient with this individual as Greg Ehrenberg just was. So there is very little wiggle room right now after you've been timed out. You're allowed to come back in. You apologize. And then we have the ambassador, if you will, of Awesemo coming in, Spags, monitoring this chat. So this is great. Look, people have learned. That's all. We want growth here. That's all we can ask for is simply growth. There is that. Isn't that bees with more honey? Isn't that the phrase?
Listen, I don't even know what happened on the previous show. I was outside going for a jog. But I don't know. But here's Spags had the good information. I'm gonna trust in him. I don't even know what we're arguing about here.
No arguments. We're just making fun of somebody. That's all.
No. In the chat though, I don't know what the grievance is, but just
every day there's a new grievance. It's Twitter. It's social media. Come on, that's all this is. It's just grievances here.
This is true, but I don't know. Just don't make up lineups and post it in the YouTube. It's an easy rule to follow. If something's not real, don't post it. We have the news god El Negro Loco. He does a great job of posting whatever news is available. He posts in our premium Slack chat. He actually is off today. He's on vacation, which I didn't know that was allowed. I thought we had him working 7 days a week. But yeah, for the first day off that he's had in at least 6 months, to my knowledge. So there we go. Just don't make up news. Don't post it. End of story.
Fair enough. All right, before we hit back on the premium Slack, we'll get some super chats up as well. Just hit us up. We do have to tell you about Prize Picks. They're sponsoring the show today, and the best, simplest fantasy game on the market. No more sharks, the lineup optimizers, the mass multi-entry. You just pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board. You go over or under their projected score. You correctly select a 5-player lineup, and that can net you up to 10 times your entry fee. Speaking of which, we will match your first deposit for up to $100 when you use our promo code Awesemo. That's it, Awesemo, and you'll get a match for up to $100. That's it. 2, 3, 4, 5 players. You correctly pick that lineup of 5, and you win 10 times your entry fee. Yes, everything, including NBA. So they have the NFL, NBA, esports, everything you can think of. Prize Picks has it. And again, we'll match that deposit. Awesemo for up to $100. And I know that you always have your eye on a line or two. The big thing that I saw on Odd Shopper, the one that they are truly confident in with over 70% X-win return on this, is the under 27.5 for James Harden. And it just goes back to what you were saying in the beginning of the show, Greg, when we got into the big three, just about how difficult it is from a DFS standpoint to kind of identify who that guy can be of the three. And I think from a betting standpoint, you kind of have to take that point of view as well and say, sure, if you get burned on this bet because 3 guys dropped 30 tonight, so be it. But the reality is it's hard to get to 28, 30 points in a postseason game, especially with 2 other superstars around you.
Yeah, I don't know in this game though, because I mean the total is 240 points. I have Harden, Durant, and Irving all projected for in between 25 and 30 real life points. So I don't think for this particular game it's all that crazy to think just because of the expected pace of play. But for a single game contest, it's all still relative to what other players score.
Do you like Holiday's total at 20.5 points? We've got a 68% X win on Odd Shopper, that going under. And now you start to factor in something that might be a little bit easier to nail down with the Bucks, knowing, of course, Giannis and everything that he kind of takes.
Yeah, so I have Drew Holiday projected slightly under 20 real life points. One thing that is a little bit of a concern for me now with taking unders on any of the Bucks starters is now that PJ Tucker is starting, he's not going to take shots. Like he's just going to stand on the court. He's going to do some cardio, run up and down, maybe pick up a rebound or two, maybe a defensive stat. The usage rate for PJ Tucker this year, 7.2%. So he's not going to use very many possessions. That means with PJ Tucker in the starting lineup, that's going to mean more shots for Giannis, more shots for Holiday, more shots for Middleton. So I'm maybe a little apprehensive about playing the unders on those on any of those guys. Even though if I had to roster one side, it would be a slight lean towards the under, but not something I would actually be confident betting in.
Zuri7 on the Slack chat. And again, we opened up with this news with Tucker. You mentioned just now as far as what Tucker does for other guys on the floor starting. So on the chat, the premium Slack, how much PJ Tucker is too much for you? At what point do you say no mas?
Let's see. I could just say in my build what I have. I have 40% PJ Tucker. So that was a number I was comfortable with. I still think he's overall the best value play on the slate. And like I was saying at the top, value is very important when we have so many all-stars on the same slate, and it's hard to find fantasy points. And is PJ Tucker certainly not a good fantasy performer, but if he plays 30 minutes and scores 9 fantasy points, it's probably enough to make him optimal on this particular slate.
Who do you have more confidence in? PJ Tucker tonight or Matisse Thybulle the other night? You killed me.
Thybulle the other night.
Fair enough.
And Thybulle was terrible.
He was. Trust me, I was the only one bitching and moaning about it on my radio show the next day. People were like, what are you talking about? I said, you didn't play him in DFS. You didn't listen to Josh and Greg and roster him across the board.
I love it. Which, by the way, has this changed the way? Because I don't know how into DFS you were before you started getting involved in this and on your radio show, but has this changed how you cover any of the Sixers games or anything?
Yes, because before I got here at Awesemo, the one that I played extensively, the one that I have wins on where I can go back and say, look at my resume, is the NFL, right? That's the one that is just constantly inundated with. I played maybe 2 or 3 cash games in MLB in my life beforehand, familiar with it. But the NBA, you dabble in, you dabble out. I just didn't know the extent of it. But honestly, after doing shows with you and a lot of guys on this station, on this channel, I got radio in my head. It's definitely changed how I look at it. And I'll tell you the biggest way it's opened and kind of changed a point of view is betting with props, is betting with the team, is taking a total, taking a spread, but also looking at Awesemo projections, looking at big board, looking at where ceilings are, guys that could fit into an optimal lineup. Because if there's a guy, let's say that's at 9.5 total points, but he's at like a 55 or 60% in the optimal lineup, I might pound that over. I might hit that if the expectation is he's going to have a big performance from a DFS standpoint. Yes. And then to take it right back, to not go too long, if somebody like Tease is out there and he's playing well, it's just not showing up on a DFS tournament or a DFS at the end of it, then yeah, I gave him shit. And that's where people were looking at me like on my show, like, dude, what is wrong with you? They won the game. He played really well. They guys struggled on offense that he was guarding. Nope. He didn't give me double-digit fantasy points. That was my beef.
Yeah, where were the assists? Where were the stray rebounds? They didn't go to him. Somebody else caught the rebounds that day. He didn't play very many minutes off the top of my head. I think he picked up 4 personal fouls and only playing 16 minutes. Then it was a blowout, so there's no reason to come in at the end. So yeah, there was a whole bunch of factors combined that led to him playing limited minutes there. And by the way, our guy Charles did follow up another super chat there saying, is it viable to throw PJ Tucker or Shamet as a captain if he already has Drew, Giannis, Harden, and Durant? Yeah, I have no issue with that. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, that I think that one of the best ways to go with building lineups on this slate is to throw in a PJ Tucker, Landry Shamet. Personally, I slightly prefer PJ Tucker as a captain, just because there's a scenario where PJ Tucker only scores 10 fantasy points, but if Drew scores 50, Giannis scores 65, Harden scores 60, Durant scores 55, you need all of them in your lineup. And in that case, it doesn't even matter which crappy, cheap captain you play. You need to have all the expensive guys.
Is there anybody like in that middle ground that you might justify rolling as a captain, let's say, that like, we didn't mention Pat Connaughton. He was popping up earlier in the day, but now with PJ Tucker, he's faded significantly on the crunch. So is there anybody that beyond the captain, but is there anybody that maybe below that 5K that we still can have in our lineups that still can be workable, that's not truly going to take away 3 of the big 4 in your lineups?
No. Yeah, it's just an issue of I don't see these guys having enough upside. So we talked about, like Joe Harris, Bobby
money,
Portis, right? Pat Connaughton. The guys are too much money with not enough upside, especially relative to the high-end guys. So that's why I think if you want to go cheaper at captain, you just go with one of these punt plays. I wouldn't go with any of the off the board mid-range plays.
Staying away from Bruce Brown as well at 4,400 on DK.
One thing that's a little bit that's a concern for me about Bruce Brown is, so even though he finished with a pretty solid fantasy game last time out and got to 24 minutes, he only got those minutes because James Harden got into foul trouble. So last game, at least, I don't know if it's going to be the same today, but Tyler Johnson was ahead of Bruce Brown in the rotation. And then Bruce Brown just ended up having to play more minutes because James Harden got into foul trouble. I think James Harden picked up his 4th foul really early in the 3rd quarter, if I remember correct. It was like a couple minutes in, he came off the court, and then they were just forced to play Bruce Brown more. I think that Bruce Brown's minutes probably take a little bit of a hit in this game. So Bruce Brown, 4,400. Nobody's an outright fade on a 1-game slate, but there's better value plays.
Joe Harris wouldn't be the outright fade?
No, he is.
Okay.
But I mean, if somebody said they had Joe Harris, can I play him? I would say not at a high clip, but if you had like 1 out of 20 lineups with him, I wouldn't have an issue with that either.
Fair enough. All right. As mentioned, everybody made it last night. So we're going to give you an opportunity. If you didn't, let's say you faded Boban. Let's say you were the one person who said, screw this guy. He's not going to do anything tonight. I'm not even going to have him in my lineup. Well, we have an opportunity for you to be in the Hall of Fame. And I did have an update, by the way, on the premium Slack as far as getting in there. There is a caveat about ties. So to be clear, I was trying to pull this up here. To be clear, nobody made it last night.
Oh,
the requirement excludes the ties. Quote, now this is from D. Powell on the premium Slack, Reg. This requirement will not be satisfied by any ties that are among more than 3 entries.
Wow. So this means that nobody got inducted last night.
No,
we thought we thought we were opening the gates to everybody, but no. So I mean, with that in mind, there's not going to be very many Hall of Fame entrants in playoff showdown because almost every night there's 3+ ties.
Yeah, we're going to need at least a couple of games, right? I don't even know if tomorrow with those 2 that it's going to be enough. You'll probably need 3, maybe 4 games on a slate just to differentiate yourself from that many people.
On a 2-game slate, at least for FanDuel, there's still a lot of ties, except for a 2-game slate on DraftKings, though there's so many different lineup iterations with the just because the flexibility in positions that it's still viable on a 2-game slate. But the 1-game slates, that's going to be tough. I know Rynpak did it once last year on a slate where he had Kendrick Nunn in the finals at like 0.1% ownership. He was like the only guy who rostered Kendrick Nunn and won a showdown contest outright. But beyond that, it's pretty hard.
That would be Jeff Teague tonight.
Could be.
I'm looking at 4.9%, 1,000 on the board. He's bottom right there on our ownership projections, just below Brent. Now, again, Brent Forbes clearly at 5,600, Joe Harris 7K, but Nick Claxton at 2,800. Are you a little surprised as we are 2.5 minutes away from things locking up that Nick Claxton is so low owned, as well as Tyler Johnson? I mean, those have been 2 names that I've heard from you, from Adam, really throughout the day here from our analysts as far as good plays that are super cheap in like a Stars and Scrubs night. Let's
see. What is Tyler Johnson? I mean, he's still 19% owned, so it's not like he's going totally unowned. We've got Nick Claxton at 15%. The one that I'm really surprised by is people are really going to DeAndre Jordan heavy. I mean, let's see. When's the last time DeAndre Jordan even played?
Oh, I have him at 29.4%, right?
Yeah. So the last time DeAndre Jordan stepped on the court, let's bring up his box scores, was May 8th. So it's been a month since DeAndre Jordan played. So that seems like an excessive amount of ownership for him.
Captain? You're going to roll with DeAndre as a captain, Greg? Just throw some money away?
Not for me.
Send Greg a check. If you're thinking about rostering DeAndre Jordan as a captain, just look, his last name is right there on his Twitter account. You could just send it to the Awesemo headquarters. Just Greg Ehrenberg. You don't even need the DFS in there. That's where you should put your money if you're going to roster DeAndre. And real quick, as far as the Awesemo Hall of Fame, now that we know nobody made it last night because of all these ties, there's another shot to do that. Just download the profile pic first and foremost from awesemo.com/avatar. Place in the top 3 of a contest with over 5,000 contestants. And yes, there are rules regarding ties. Tweet the wins at Awesemo HOF, and you'll win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. It's amazing. And all those winners there, no ties, nothing at all. You can just see that list go down. All right, brother, what have we forgotten as we clean up here and get ready for lock? Is there anything that we've overlooked?
I don't think so. I think we've hit pretty much everything.
Do you like the Nets?
I think we've talked about every single player individually on this slate. In terms of, I don't know what to expect from the series. I have a slight lean towards the Nets, but I mean, the series line is -200 for the Nets. The Nets are, at least before we started, they were 5-point favorites. That seems all about fair to me. I know a lot of people seem to think the Nets are locks to win the series. I mean, that's always a little crazy to me, especially when they're only a -200 favorite. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's a pretty tight series with a slight lean towards the Nets. Do you have a strong feel on who's going to win?
I'm with you on the Nets, just because I think that there is this still unknown of how good they can really be on the floor, especially offensively. And this is going to be a pretty good litmus test for Brooklyn. Look, the matchup with Giannis, like the matchup we assume with Embiid, is going to be difficult, but they have so much firepower. I think, if anything, I might just wait a couple of minutes and see how this tempo plays in the first quarter. Maybe it's a little slow and you can get that live total to drop a couple of points and then hit that over. But yes, I'm confident in the Nets, but I'm really confident in a lot of these games until the books adjust, being super high scoring. So I wouldn't be upset with a pre-flop over right now, but that's probably the only thing I'd bet ahead of time.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's a really high number, so I don't know if I want to go over 240. But yeah, I'm very interested to see the series. I've been, and by the way, the total's actually gone up since we started the show. It's at 240.5 now. But
look at that.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this series more than anyone over the course of the season.
More than Philadelphia and Atlanta? I don't believe you.
Yes.
All right. That's Greg Ehrenberg. Make sure you're following him on Twitter, and me as well. Thanks to Chris for producing the show. Thanks to you out there. Just leave us a like. Make sure you subscribe. First and foremost, we want you to be part here of the Awesemo platform, and make sure you're up bright and early tomorrow morning as we'll get things going to start Sunday's action. Look, a lot of things going on. We appreciate you sticking with us. So for Greg, for Chris, for Awesemo, have a great night.